What if the deadliest battle of the Chunin exams ended very differently? What if the monster hiding inside the forest of death wasn't the one everyone feared? The Chunin exams were supposed to test courage, skill, and teamwork, but hidden deep within the ancient forest lurked a predator unlike any shinobi had ever faced. A legendary Sannin, a man whose very presence could make experienced ninja tremble. Orochimaru. When Team 7 entered the forest of death, they believed their greatest challenge would be stealing an earth scroll. They had no idea they were being hunted. As Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura fought to survive against rival genin, an unseen pair of golden eyes watched their every move from the shadows. Waiting, studying, searching for the perfect moment to strike. But this time, fate has prepared something Orochimaru never expected. A Naruto who refuses to surrender. A Sasuke willing to risk everything. And a secret power capable of changing the outcome of the Chunin exams forever. The Forest of Death is about to witness a battle that will rewrite ninja history. This is What If Naruto Awakens Mokuton during Chunin exams. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The gates of Training Ground 44 rose out of the morning mist like the ribs of some long-dead beast, iron bars streaked with rust, and old chakra seals humming faintly beneath their surface. Beyond them, the forest waited, dense, dark, and utterly silent in the way that only truly dangerous places could be silent, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Naruto Uzumaki stood at the front of the crowd of genin, rocking back and forth on the balls of his feet, trying and failing to look like he wasn't nervous. "Would you stop that?" Sakura muttered beside him, arms crossed over the sleeves of her red jacket. "You're making me nervous just watching you." "I'm not nervous," Naruto said too quickly. "I'm excited." "There's a difference." "Sure there is." Sasuke said nothing. He stood a few feet apart from them both, hands in his pockets, dark eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the gate with an unreadable expression. Ever since the first exam, since Ibiki Marino's written test and the tense hour that had followed, there had been a strange, coiled tension in him, like a spring wound one notch too tight. Naruto had noticed it. He always noticed things about Sasuke, even the things Sasuke didn't want him to notice. At the center of the clearing, framed by the looming gate, stood a woman with dark hair pulled back beneath a tan trench coat, a mesh shirt visible at her collar, and a smile that promised nothing good. "All right, maggots, listen up!" Enko Midarashi's voice cracked across the assembled genin like a whip. "This is Training Ground 44, better known as the Forest of Death. And believe me, that name is not for dramatic effect." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. Enko did not smile. "Each team will receive one of two scrolls, heaven or earth." She held up two scroll cases, one pale, one dark, for the crowd to see. "Your objective is simple. Collect one of each, bring both to the tower at the center of this forest within 5 days, and you pass to the third exam. Fail to do so, and you don't." 5 days, Sakura murmured. "That's a long time to be in there." "It's more than enough time to die in there," Enko said, as if she'd heard her. Her eyes swept the crowd with something that might have been amusement. "You'll notice I said collect, not steal. There's a difference, but most of you will find it's a fine one. You are permitted, encouraged even, to take scrolls from other teams by force. This is not a scavenger hunt. This is a battlefield with an entrance fee." Naruto's stomach did a slow, cold flip. He glanced sideways at Sakura, who had gone slightly pale, and then at Sasuke, whose expression hadn't changed at all. "One more thing," Enko continued, and this time there was a harder edge in her voice. "Inside that forest are things that want to kill you, not people, though there will be plenty of those too, but the forest itself. Poisonous plants. Territorial animals the size of houses. Traps left over from decades of shinobi using this place to train and to die. Do not eat anything you don't recognize. Do not drink from any water source without purifying it first. And do not, under any circumstances, assume that because something looks harmless, it is harmless." She let that sit for a moment, her gaze sweeping the crowd, and Naruto could have sworn it lingered on Team 7 half a second longer than the others, though that might have just been nerves talking. "Any questions?" A hand went up. A boy from a team Naruto didn't recognize, thin and pale with a nervous twitch to his mouth. "What happens if we lose our scroll?" Then you'd better find another team to take one from, Enko said flatly. Or you fail. There's no partial credit in this exam. The boy sat back down, looking a little green. Enko clapped her hands together. All right. Go get your paperwork sorted, sign your consent forms. Yes, you need to sign a form saying you understand you might die. This is a shinobi village, not a daycare, and then report to your designated gate. We start in 20 minutes. The consent form was a single sheet of paper, dense with small print, and Naruto skimmed it twice without really absorbing any of it beyond the general gist. You might die, and if you do, it's not really anyone's fault but your own for signing up to be a ninja in the first place. He signed his name at the bottom with more force than strictly necessary, the pen nearly tearing through the paper. You're going to break the desk, Sakura said, watching him. I'm not gonna break anything. Naruto slid the form across to the Chunin collecting them, a tired-looking man with a clipboard who barely glanced at it before filing it away. See? Signed and everything. Nothing broken. The desk is still intact, yes, Sakura said. I was talking about your pen. Naruto looked down. The pen had, in fact, cracked slightly along one side where he'd gripped it too hard. He set it down, a little sheepish, and rubbed the back of his neck. Okay, maybe I was a little tense. A little. Sasuke had already finished his form and was standing near the exit, waiting, his dark eyes distant in that way that meant his mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying the written exam, maybe, or turning over Enko's warnings, or something else Naruto couldn't guess at. Naruto jogged over to fall and step beside him. Hey! You good? Fine, Sasuke said in the clipped tone that meant drop it. Naruto, characteristically, did not drop it. You've been kind of quiet since the first test. I'm always quiet. You've been quieter. Sasuke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm thinking about the exam, Naruto. That's all. It wasn't all, Naruto was fairly sure. But he also knew from long experience that pushing Sasuke when he decided to clam up was about as productive as pushing against a boulder. All it got you was tired and no closer to moving anything. So he let it go, for now, filing the observation away in the part of his brain that kept track of things about his teammates that felt important even when he couldn't articulate why. They reconvened outside, where Kakashi was waiting for them near a smaller gate marked with the number 12. Their sensei had his usual half-lidded, unbothered expression, one visible eye crinkled in what might have been the shape of a smile beneath his mask. So, he said. Ready for exam 2? Obviously, Naruto said. Naturally, Sasuke said. I signed a form saying I might die, Sakura said. So I suppose we'll find out. Kakashi's eye crinkled further. That's the spirit. A few things before you go in. His tone shifted, just slightly, into something more serious. The version of Kakashi that emerged when he actually meant to teach them something rather than needle them. First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in there, it probably is. The forest plays tricks, genjutsu, animal mimicry, disguised traps. Don't assume anything is what it looks like. Enko said something similar, Sakura said. Enko would know. Second, work together. I know the three of you don't always. A slight pause, a glance towards Sasuke and then Naruto, see eye to eye, but in there, your survival depends on functioning as a unit. This isn't the time to prove yourselves individually. Naruto opened his mouth to protest that he always worked well with his team, thank you very much, and then reconsidered, because the memory of several recent training exercises did not entirely support that claim. Third, Kakashi said, and here his voice dropped slightly, if you encounter anything that seems unusually powerful, anything that doesn't feel like an ordinary genin team or an ordinary animal, disengage. Don't be heroes. Get away and regroup. Understood? There was something in the way he said it that made Naruto's easy confidence flicker, just for a second. Kakashi didn't often sound like that, like he was warning them about something specific rather than giving general advice. Understood, Sakura said, and after a beat, Sasuke nodded too. Good. Kakashi straightened, his usual lazy air sliding back over him like a curtain falling. Then good luck. I'll see you at the tower, or I won't, and either way, I expect you to come out the other side in one piece. All three of you. He held up a hand in a small wave and then, in the particular way Jonin had of simply not being there anymore, was gone. Their gate, Gate 12, stood slightly apart from the others, a smaller iron door set into the outer wall of the training ground, guarded by a bored-looking Chunin with a scroll case slung over one shoulder. Team 7? He asked, though it was clearly a formality. He already had a chart in front of him. That's us, Naruto said. The Chunin checked something off, then held out a scroll case, pale, cream-colored. Heaven Scroll. Do not open it before you reach the tower. Do not look inside it. Do not let anyone else look inside it. Understood? What happens if we open it? Naruto asked, because he was constitutionally incapable of not asking. Bad things, the Chunin said unhelpfully. Just don't. Sakura took the scroll before Naruto could reach for it, tucking it into a pouch at her hip and sealing the flap. We won't, she said, with the particular firmness of someone who did not entirely trust her teammates' impulse control. I wasn't gonna. You were absolutely going to open it eventually, out of curiosity. And I am saving us all that headache, Sakura said. Sasuke made a small sound that might, in a more expressive person, have been a laugh. The gate creaked open, revealing a narrow path swallowed almost immediately by undergrowth, the canopy above so thick that the morning light barely filtered through in anything more than pale, scattered patches. The air that rolled out to meet them was cool and damp and smelled of wet earth and green growing things and, underneath that, something else, something faintly metallic that Naruto didn't like the smell of at all. Once the horn sounds, you may enter, the Chunin said. Good luck. They stood at the threshold, the three of them, and for a moment nobody said anything. Well, Naruto said finally, cracking his knuckles. This is it. This is it, Sakura agreed, her voice steadier than her expression. Sasuke said nothing, but he settled into a low, ready stance, one hand drifting toward the kunai pouch at his hip. Somewhere across the training ground, muffled by distance and trees, a horn sounded, a long, low note that seemed to hang in the air far longer than it should have. The gate swung fully open. Team 7 went in. The forest closed around them almost instantly, the light dimming further with every step, the ordinary sounds of the outside world, the murmur of the crowd, the creak of the gate, swallowed up by a heavier, more textured silence full of small rustlings and distant, unidentifiable calls. Naruto found himself walking softer than usual, some instinct telling him that noise, here, was a luxury they couldn't afford. Which way? He asked low. Toward the tower, obviously, Sakura said, equally quiet, pulling a small compass from her supply pouch and orienting it. It's roughly northeast from gate 12. But we shouldn't head straight there. Why not? Naruto asked. Because everyone knows the tower is northeast of every gate, relative to itself, Sasuke said before Sakura could answer. Which means the most direct paths will be the most heavily trafficked, and the most dangerous. He's right, Sakura said. We should move in a wider arc, slower, but safer. Try to find a defensible position first, get our bearings, and then start looking for an Earth Scroll team. Naruto considered this, and found he couldn't argue with it, which was mildly annoying, because he'd been hoping to suggest something more along the lines of charge forward and hit the first thing we see, and it appeared that plan had already been overruled by superior logic before he'd even voiced it. Fine, he said. Slow and careful. Got it. They moved. The forest was, if anything, more oppressive the deeper they went. The trees here were ancient, thick-trunked giants whose roots buckled up out of the earth in great gnarled ridges, whose canopies knit together so tightly overhead that entire stretches of ground lay in permanent twilight. Undergrowth choked the spaces between the trunks, ferns and vines and strange broad-leafed plants that Naruto didn't recognize and, mindful of Anko's warning, did not touch. Every so often they passed evidence of the forest's less metaphorical dangers, a massive tiger print pressed into soft mud, easily the size of a dinner plate, a stretch of webbing strung between two trees, thick as rope, glistening faintly and clearly built by something considerably larger than any spider had a right to be. Once, disturbingly, a scattering of bones half buried in leaf litter, picked so clean that Naruto couldn't even tell what animal, or what had been an animal, they'd belonged to. Cheerful place, he muttered. It's called the Forest of Death, Naruto, Sakura said. What did you expect, flowers and butterflies? I mean, a little bit of flowers and butterflies would have been nice. Sasuke, at the front of their loose formation, raised a hand, a small, sharp gesture that both of them had learned, over months of training together, meant stop, now, quietly. They stopped. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, from somewhere ahead and to the left, a branch cracked, not the ordinary settling sound of a forest, but the specific, deliberate crack of something heavy shifting its weight. Sasuke's hand moved again, 2, maybe 3. Then he pointed, northwest, roughly 30 meters, behind a stand of broad ferns. Naruto's pulse picked up. He glanced at Sakura, who had gone very still, eyes narrowed on the spot Sasuke had indicated, and then back at the ferns themselves. He couldn't see anything, but the forest had gone quiet around them, the way it did when a predator was near. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals, just that thick, listening silence. They waited. The ferns rustled again, closer this time, unmistakably closer, and then went abruptly, jarringly still. It's watching us, Sakura breathed. Or it's already gone, Sasuke murmured back. Could have just been passing through. Naruto didn't think so. Something about the quality of the silence told him whatever was out there hadn't moved on, had simply gone still the way a predator goes still right before it decides whether the prey in front of it is worth the effort of a kill. He found his hand had drifted, without quite meaning it to, toward the kunai at his hip. Long seconds ticked by. Nothing happened. Finally, Sasuke exhaled, very quietly, and straightened out of his half-crouch. Gone, he said. Or decided we weren't worth it. Charming, Naruto muttered, but he felt some of the tension bleed out of his shoulders all the same. They moved on, faster now, putting distance between themselves and whatever had been watching from the ferns. By what Naruto guessed was mid-morning. It was hard to tell time under a canopy that blotted out most of the sky. They'd found a rough clearing bordered on 2 sides by a shallow creek and on the other 2 by a natural wall of tangled roots and fallen trunks, high enough to provide cover and narrow enough to funnel any attacker into a predictable approach. This'll do, Sakura said, surveying it with a critical eye. Good sight lines, water access, defensible. You sound like you've been planning this for weeks, Naruto said. I have been planning this for weeks, Sakura said. I read 3 different scrolls on Forest of Death survival strategies before the exam even started. Did you seriously think I was just going to wing it? Naruto, who had in fact spent most of his preparation time practicing shadow clones and eating ramen, decided this was not the moment to admit that. Great planning, he said instead. Really thorough. Sasuke had already moved to the edge of the clearing, crouched low, running a hand along the bark of one of the fallen trunks with the focused attention of someone checking for traps or hidden seals. Clear, he said after a moment. No markings, no chakra residue. Good. Sakura knelt by the creek, dipping a small vial into the water and holding it up to the thin shafts of light that made it through the canopy, checking the color and clarity before nodding, satisfied. Water's clean enough to purify. We should refill here before we move on. They took a few minutes to do exactly that, filling canteens, purifying water with a simple jutsu Sakura had picked up from the academy's more advanced curriculum, resting just long enough to catch their breath without letting their guard down entirely. Naruto found himself watching the tree line the whole time, some prickling unease refusing to fully settle even in the relative safety of their little clearing. You feel that too? He asked quietly, glancing at Sasuke. Sasuke didn't look up from the canteen he was filling. Feel what? Like we're being watched. Still, a pause. Then quietly, yeah? I feel it. Sakura's head came up sharply. Should we move? Not yet, Sasuke said. If it wanted to attack, it would have by now. Could just be the forest itself. Animals watching from cover, waiting to see if we're a threat. Could be, Naruto agreed, though he didn't entirely believe it. There was a specific quality to the feeling of being watched by something with intent to harm you, something he developed a fairly reliable instinct for over a childhood spent as the village's least popular resident, and this felt uncomfortably close to that particular flavor of dread. They finished refilling their canteens in a slightly more hurried silence than before, and set off again with renewed urgency, angling further northeast, deeper into the tangled heart of the forest. The unease none of them mentioned again trailing along quietly behind them like a fourth, unwelcome member of the team. It was perhaps 2 hours later. The light overhead had shifted from the pale gray of morning to something a little warmer, though still filtered and dim, that they finally spotted another team. Sasuke's hand went up again, the same sharp signal, and this time Naruto saw it too, movement through the trees ahead, 3 figures moving in a loose triangle formation, headbands glinting faintly with the symbol of a village Naruto didn't immediately recognize, a stylized wave pattern that took him a second to place. Kirigakure, Sakura breathed. Hit and missed. Great, Naruto muttered. Not just any team. A team from a whole different country. Doesn't mean they're stronger, Sasuke said, though his eyes had narrowed with a kind of focused wariness Naruto recognized, the look he got when assessing an opponent, cataloging strengths and weaknesses with the cold efficiency that made him, infuriatingly, one of the best tacticians in their year. They crouched low behind a fallen log, watching. The Kiri team moved with the confidence of genin who trained somewhere considerably harsher than the relatively comfortable environs of Konoha, all 3 of them scanning constantly, weapons never quite sheathed, movements economical and quiet in a way that spoke of real field experience rather than academy drilling. What scroll do you think they've got? Naruto whispered. No way to tell from here, Sakura murmured back. Could be either. We could ambush them, Naruto said, already feeling the familiar itch of let's just do something creeping up his spine. Catch him off guard, grab the scroll, and get out before they know what hit him. Or, Sasuke said, we could wait and see if they're carrying a heaven scroll, in which case engaging them is a waste of time and unnecessary risk, since we already have one. Naruto deflated slightly. Right. That makes sense too. They watched a moment longer. One of the Kiri genin, a tall boy with bandages wrapped around most of his face, something large and cloth-wrapped strapped to his back, paused abruptly, head tilting, and Naruto's stomach lurched with the sudden certainty that they'd been spotted. But the boy's attention wasn't on their hiding spot. It was on something else entirely, further into the trees, and after a moment he said something too quiet for Naruto to catch to his teammates, and the 3 of them peeled off in a different direction entirely, moving fast and low, vanishing into the undergrowth within seconds. What was that about? Naruto whispered, once the sound of their passage had faded. I don't know, Sakura said slowly, but I don't love it. Something spooked them, and they're trained shinobi from a village known for producing some of the deadliest genin in the exams. If something spooked them, then it's probably something we want to avoid too, Sasuke finished. A beat of silence passed between the 3 of them. We should probably not go in the direction they just came from, Naruto said. Agreed, said Sakura and Sasuke, almost in unison, and for once in the whole exam, Team 7 was in perfect, immediate accord. They shifted their route to avoid whatever had unsettled the Kiri team, angling south and slightly east instead, deeper into a section of forest where the trees grew even taller and closer together, ancient enough that their trunks were wider around than 3 people linking hands could span. Moss carpeted everything, rocks, roots, the lower few feet of every trunk, muffling their footsteps in a way that felt less like good luck and more like the forest itself was folding them into its silence. It was here, in the deepest, oldest part of the Forest of Death, that they found the First Earth Scroll team. Or, more accurately, the First Earth Scroll team found them. Naruto felt it before he saw anything, a subtle shift in the air, a prickling awareness along the back of his neck that something was wrong, and he'd only half turned, hand already moving toward his kunai, when the first flurry of shuriken tore out of the canopy above. Down! Sasuke shouted, and the 3 of them scattered, Sakura rolling left behind the cover of a thick root, Naruto diving right, Sasuke twisting mid-motion to deflect the nearest projectiles with a kunai pulled and thrown in the same fluid movement, metal ringing against metal in a shower of sparks. Where Naruto started, scrambling up into a crouch, eyes scanning the canopy. There! Sakura's voice, sharp with warning, and Naruto's gaze snapped to where she was pointing, 3 figures dropping from the branches above, landing in a loose semicircle that put Team 7 neatly boxed in against the very root wall they'd been using for cover only minutes before. They wore forehead protectors marked with a symbol Naruto recognized instantly, Konoha's own leaf, which meant, with a sinking feeling, that this was a rival team from their own village, not some foreign threat they could write off as unknown and therefore excusable. Well, well, said the one in front, a lean, sharp-featured boy with his headband tied at an angle, a smirk already curling across his mouth. Team 7 didn't expect to run into the Uchiha's little fan club all the way out here. Sasuke's expression didn't so much as flicker, but Naruto felt his own jaw tighten at the jab. We don't want trouble, Sakura said, straightening, kunai already in hand despite her words. We've got a heaven scroll. If that's what you're after, you're wasting your time. Actually, said the girl to the boy's left, shorter, wiry, with a headband worn like a bandana over close-cropped hair. We're pretty sure it's exactly what we're after. See, we've already got an earth scroll. What we need is a heaven scroll. And you three just told us you happen to have one. Naruto's stomach dropped. Beside him, he heard Sakura's soft, exhaled curse. She'd walked them right into confirming exactly what these three needed to hear. Should have kept your mouth shut, Pinky, the smirking boy said, and there was something genuinely unpleasant in the way he said it, something that made Naruto's hands curl into fists. Don't call her that, he snapped, before he could think better of it. The third member of the rival team, a heavy-set boy who hadn't spoken yet, arms crossed, a strange metal gauntlet fitted over one hand, snorted. The loudmouth's got some bite. That's cute. Enough talk, Sasuke said quietly, and something in his tone made all three of the rival genins' attention swing toward him instead. You want the scroll, you're going to have to take it, so let's stop wasting time. The smirking boy's grin widened, sharp and eager. Finally, someone with some sense. All right then, Uchiha. Let's see what all the fuss is about. He moved first, a blur of motion, hand flashing through a rapid series of seals that Naruto didn't have time to fully track before the boy's palms slammed into the ground and a section of earth beneath Sasuke's feet erupted upward in a spray of dirt and stone. Sasuke was already moving, twisting out of the blast radius with the kind of fluid precision that made Naruto's chest tighten with a familiar mix of admiration and frustration, landing lightly several feet away and already reaching for a kunai. Doton user, Sakura said, low and fast. Earth release. Watch your footing. He can probably manipulate the ground under all of us, not just Sasuke. Got it, Naruto said, already backing toward slightly firmer terrain, eyes flicking to the other two rival genin, who hadn't moved yet, clearly content to let their teammate open the engagement. The girl with the bandana headband was watching Sakura with a calculating expression that made Naruto distinctly uneasy. You're the analyst, huh? She said. Figures. Every team's got one. Doesn't matter how smart you are if you can't back it up. She moved with startling speed, closing the distance towards Sakura in a blur, and Sakura barely got her kunai up in time to deflect the first strike, the impact jarring visibly up her arm. Sakura! Naruto started forward, only for the heavy-set boy to step directly into his path, gauntlet fist already swinging in a blow that Naruto only just managed to duck under, feeling the wind of it ruffle his hair as it passed. Not so fast, Blondie, the boy said. You're mine. Great, Naruto muttered, scrambling back to put a few feet of distance between them. Really wanted to fight the guy with the metal fist. The boy grinned, unpleasant and confident, and swung again. The clearing dissolved into chaos. Sasuke was locked in a rapid exchange with the earth user, ducking and weaving around bursts of erupting stone, throwing kunai that were deflected by quick, improvised barriers of hardened dirt. The two of them moving in a tense, escalating dance that neither seemed quite able to gain the upper hand in. Sakura, meanwhile, was faring worse than Naruto liked. The bandana girl fought with a scrappy, unpredictable style, mixing taijutsu strikes with quick, darting feints that kept Sakura constantly on the defensive, forced to block and retreat rather than find any opening to counter. A shallow cut had opened along her forearm where a strike had gotten through her guard, and though she was gritting her teeth and holding her ground, Naruto could see the strain starting to show, and Naruto himself was locked in an increasingly frustrating exchange with the heavy-set boy, whose gauntlet fist seemed to hit like a battering ram every time it connected, which, so far, it hadn't, but only because Naruto had spent the entire fight dodging rather than engaging, unable to find a gap in the boy's guard that wasn't immediately covered by that same metal-plated hand. Come on, Naruto muttered, weaving back from another heavy swing. Just gotta find an opening. Shadow clones, he thought suddenly, cursing himself for not thinking of it sooner, and his hands flew through the familiar seal. Shadow clone jutsu. 3 copies of himself sprang into existence around the heavy-set boy, and for a half-second the boy's confident expression flickered into something like surprise. But only a half-second, because he recovered fast, gauntlet already swinging in a wide arc that caught one clone across the chest and dispersed it instantly in a puff of smoke. Cute trick, the boy said, but more targets doesn't mean smarter targets. The remaining 2 clones came at him from opposite sides, and this time the boy had to actually commit to defending both angles, gauntlet snapping out to block one strike while he twisted awkwardly to avoid the other, and in that half-second of divided attention, the real Naruto, who'd hung back rather than joining the clone's direct assault, saw his opening and drove a solid kick into the side of the boy's knee. The boy grunted, staggering, and Naruto pressed the advantage, following up with a strike toward his ribs, only for the gauntlet fist to snap around faster than he'd anticipated and catch him solidly across the jaw. Naruto's vision whited out for a half-second, and he hit the ground hard, ears ringing, the coppery taste of blood blooming in his mouth. Naruto! Sakura's voice, distant and frightened, cutting through the ringing in his ears. He forced himself up onto one elbow, shaking his head to clear it, and saw the heavy-set boy advancing toward him, gauntlet cocked back for another blow. Expression settled into something grim and businesslike now that the earlier mockery had burned off. Get up! Get up, get up, get up! Naruto's remaining clone, still standing, threw itself at the boy's back in a desperate tackle that bought maybe 2 seconds, enough time for Naruto to scramble backward, putting distance between himself and that gauntlet fist, hands already flying through seals for another clone, then another, the clearing filling with copies of himself in a chaotic multiplication that even Naruto himself found it hard to keep track of. Across the clearing, he caught a fractured glimpse of Sasuke, Sharingan blazing red, 2 tomos spinning in each eye, finally having activated the bloodline that made him one of the most dangerous genin in the exam. Driving the Earth user backward with a series of strikes the other boy was now barely managing to predict, let alone counter. Good, Naruto thought distantly, even as he ducked another swing from the heavy-set boy. At least Sasuke's got it handled. He didn't have time to check on Sakura. He didn't have time to check on anything except the immediate, pressing problem of the fist currently trying very hard to rearrange his face. The tide shifted slowly in Team 7's favor, Naruto's clones wearing down the heavy-set boy's stamina through sheer attrition, forcing him to expend chakra and effort blocking and dispersing clone after clone until his movements began to slow, his breathing grow ragged. Sasuke's Sharingan giving him the edge he needed to finally land a solid hit on the Earth user. A kunai strike across the shoulder that made the other boy stumble and lose the rhythm of his jutsu. But Sakura was still struggling. The bandana girl had pressed her advantage relentlessly, and Sakura had been forced back nearly to the edge of the creek, breathing hard. A second shallow cut opened along her cheek, her kunai held in a white-knuckled grip. Getting tired, Pinky? The girl taunted, circling. Don't, Sakura gritted out, call me that. She lunged, not the defensive retreat the other girl had clearly come to expect, but a genuine, committed attack, kunai flashing in a strike aimed at the girl's exposed side. It wasn't Sakura's strongest technique, and both of them seemed to know it, but the girl was forced to actually block rather than simply dodge, and in the half-second that cost her, Sakura followed up with a second strike that this time connected, a shallow but real cut opening across the other girl's forearm. You little, the girl hissed, and pressed forward again, faster now, angrier. Naruto, dispersing his last clone with a grunt of effort and turning in time to see Sakura stumble back from a strike that nearly took her legs out from under her, felt something in his chest go tight and cold. Sakura, he didn't think. He just moved, cutting across the clearing at a dead sprint, and threw himself bodily between Sakura and the advancing girl just as another strike came in, catching it across his own forearm instead, the impact numbing his whole arm from wrist to elbow, but better his arm than Sakura's ribs. Naruto, what are you, little busy here? Naruto managed through gritted teeth, shoving the girl backward with more force than finesse, buying them both half a second of breathing room. You okay? I'm fine, I don't need. Not now, argue about it later. Naruto snapped, and to his own surprise Sakura actually listened, falling into a rough defensive position beside him rather than continuing the protest. The bandana girl had recovered her footing and was watching them both with narrowed eyes, clearly recalculating. 2-on-1 now? Fine by me. More of you to knock down. She came at them fast, and this time Naruto and Sakura moved together, an improvised, imperfect coordination born of months of team training rather than any explicit plan. Naruto drawing her attention with a feint while Sakura circled to strike from the flank, and though it wasn't pretty, it worked well enough to force the girl back another step, off balance, her confidence visibly cracking for the first time since the fight had begun. Across the clearing, A shout went up. The Earth User, finally overwhelmed by Sasuke's relentless, Sharingan-guided assault, stumbling and going down hard. A kunai pressed to his throat before he could so much as raise a hand in defense. Yield, Sasuke said, voice flat and cold, or I won't stop at a scratch. The boy, wide-eyed and clearly rattled by the crimson, spinning eyes fixed on him, went very still. Yield, he said hoarsely. The heavy-set boy, seeing his teammate go down, hesitated, just for a moment, just long enough for Naruto to notice the shift in his stance, the flicker of doubt crossing his face. Give it up, Naruto called across the clearing, chest heaving, blood still trickling from the corner of his mouth. Your buddy's down, and it's 3 against 2 now unless you back off. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the bandana girl, breathing hard, lowered her kunai slightly. This isn't worth it, she said, more to her heavy-set teammate than to Team 7. We've got our Earth Scroll already. Let's find someone else for the Heaven Scroll. The heavy-set boy's jaw worked for a moment, clearly torn between pride and pragmatism, before pragmatism won out. He straightened, stepping back from Naruto with visible reluctance. Fine. Not worth the trouble. Sasuke released his hold on the Earth User, who scrambled backward the moment the pressure of the kunai left his throat, joining his teammates with an expression caught somewhere between relief and humiliation. This isn't over, the smirking boy, now considerably less smirking, a thin cut along his cheek from where one of Sasuke's kunai had grazed him, said, more out of wounded pride than any real conviction. Next time. There's not going to be a next time if you keep making bad decisions, Sakura snapped, still breathing hard, kunai steady in her hand despite the tremor Naruto could see running through her shoulders. The 3 rival genin retreated, melting back into the tree line with considerably less confidence than they'd emerged with, and within moments the clearing had gone quiet again, filled with nothing but the 3 members of Team 7, breathing hard, bruised and bloody. But Naruto did a quick, frantic mental check. All 3 of them still standing. Everyone okay? Sakura asked, once the sound of the retreating team's footsteps had fully faded, her voice still a little shaky with adrenaline. I've had worse, Naruto said, wiping the blood from his split lip with the back of his hand and wincing. I'll live. Sakura glanced down at the cut along her forearm, wincing slightly as she flexed it. Nothing deep. Sasuke? Fine, Sasuke said, and he did seem, at least physically, largely unscathed. A few scrapes, nothing that seemed to be bothering him. His Sharingan had faded back to its ordinary dark color, and he looked, if anything, more tired than injured. The strain of maintaining the bloodline limit for an extended fight showing in the slight tightness around his eyes. That was too close, Sakura said, sitting down heavily on one of the fallen logs, pulling a small first aid kit from her supply pouch with hands that weren't quite steady. If they'd figured out we only had 2 people actually fighting at full capacity instead of 3. But they didn't, Naruto said, settling down beside her, holding out his forearm for her to examine, the numbness from the block strike finally fading into a dull, throbbing ache. We got through it. That's what matters. We got through it this time, Sakura said, dabbing at the cut on her cheek with a disinfectant-soaked cloth, hissing slightly at the sting. We've got 4 more days of this, Naruto. We can't afford to get this banged up every single encounter. She's right, Sasuke said, crouching to check the wrapping on Sakura's forearm with a critical eye. We need to be smarter about who we engage and how. That fight wasn't necessary. We already had a Heaven Scroll. We should have avoided them entirely rather than getting drawn into confirming what we had. That one's on me, Sakura admitted, wincing, though whether from the memory or the sting of antiseptic, Naruto couldn't tell. I gave that away without thinking. I should have kept quiet. We all make mistakes when we're startled, Sasuke said, which was about as close to reassurance as Sasuke's vocabulary generally allowed. Next time, we don't announce anything. We disengage if we can, and only fight if we're cornered. Agreed, Naruto said, flexing his bruised forearm experimentally and wincing at the twinge of pain that shot through it. Though for the record I think we handled ourselves pretty well, all things considered. 3 genin, no scroll lost, nobody seriously hurt. I'll take that. Sakura managed a small, tired smile. I suppose that's true. They rested for a few minutes longer, tending to their various scrapes and bruises, catching their breath. The adrenaline of the fight slowly draining out of all 3 of them, and leaving behind the dull ache of exertion and the low, persistent hum of nerves that came with knowing the forest around them held who knew how many more encounters like the one they just survived. We should keep moving, Sasuke said eventually, rising and offering Sakura a hand up, which she took with a small, grateful nod. That fight wasn't quiet. If anyone else was nearby, they'll have heard it. Right. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, testing his weight, satisfied that nothing beyond the bruising and the split lip had been seriously damaged. Which way? Sakura consulted her compass again, orienting herself. Still northeast, roughly, but let's cut a different angle than we were planning, away from where that fight just happened, in case they regroup and decide to try again, or in case someone else heard the noise and comes to investigate. They set off once more, moving a little slower now, favoring bruised limbs and aching ribs, the forest around them no less oppressive for the small victory they just claimed within it. If anything, the encounter had only sharpened Naruto's awareness of just how dangerous these 5 days were likely to be. 3 genin from their own village, not even especially fearsome ones by the standards of what Naruto suspected lurked deeper in this forest, had nearly overwhelmed them through sheer tactical pressure and force of numbers. And that Kiri team fled from something, he thought, glancing warily at the deepening shadows around them as the afternoon light continued its slow retreat behind the canopy. Something bad enough to spook shinobi who didn't even blink at ambushing us. He didn't say it out loud. There didn't seem to be much point in voicing a fear that all 3 of them, he was fairly certain, already shared. They made better time over the next several hours, moving with the practiced quiet of shinobi trained since childhood to disappear into terrain, avoiding 2 more distant encounters, the telltale sounds of combat drifting through the trees from far enough away that they were able to simply reroute around them rather than risk getting drawn in. By the time the light overhead had shifted into the deep amber tones of late afternoon, casting long, strange shadows through the ancient trees, they'd covered what Sakura estimated to be perhaps a third of the total distance to the tower. Slower progress than any of them would have liked, but steady, and more importantly, they'd arrived without further injury. We should find somewhere to make camp before it gets fully dark, Sakura said, glancing up at what little sky was visible through gaps in the canopy, gauging the fading light with a practiced eye. Moving through this forest at night sounds like an excellent way to walk directly into something's mouth. Agreed, Sasuke said. There. He pointed toward a rocky outcropping perhaps 100 meters ahead, where a natural overhang of stone created a shallow, defensible hollow, half concealed by a curtain of hanging vines. Good cover, single approach, and it'll block wind and rain if the weather turns. They made their way toward it cautiously, checking the surrounding area thoroughly before committing to the space, Sasuke sweeping for chakra traps, Sakura checking for signs of animal habitation, Naruto keeping watch on the tree line with the particular restless energy of someone who found sitting still considerably harder than most other shinobi skills. Satisfied the hollow was clear, they settled in as the light continued to fade, the forest around them shifting from the amber tones of late afternoon into the deep blue-gray of evening, the temperature dropping noticeably as full dark approached. We should set watches, Sakura said, pulling out a small ration bar and breaking it into 3 roughly equal pieces, handing one to each of her teammates. 2 hours each, someone always awake. I'll take first. I'll take second, Sasuke said. Guess that leaves me with third, Naruto said, around a mouthful of the ration bar, which tasted vaguely of dried fruit and not much else. Fine by me. I always end up awake in the middle of the night anyway. They ate in relative quiet, the ordinary chatter that usually accompanied their meals subdued by the weight of the day, the fight, the lingering unease about whatever had spooked the Kiri team, the sheer scale of the task still ahead of them. Naruto found his gaze drifting, more than once, to Sasuke, who sat slightly apart from the 2 of them even now, staring into the middle distance with that same distracted intensity he'd carried since the written exam. Hey, Naruto said eventually, quiet enough that it wouldn't carry beyond their small hollow. You gonna tell me what's actually bugging you, or am I gonna have to guess all week? Sasuke's eyes flicked toward him, something guarded and uncertain passing briefly across his expression before it smoothed back into its usual composed neutrality. It's nothing. It's not nothing. You've been weird since the first exam. I activated my Sharingan for the first time today, Naruto, Sasuke said, a little sharply. Maybe that's what's on my mind. That, at least, Naruto could understand, the weight of a bloodline limit finally manifesting, the complicated tangle of pride and grief that likely came bundled with anything connected to the Uchiha name. Given everything Naruto knew, secondhand and incomplete, about what had happened to that clan, he let the subject drop, this time for good, recognizing the particular quality of Sasuke's silence as one that pushing further would only make worse. For what it's worth, he said instead, you fought well today. Really well. Sasuke didn't answer, but something in the tense line of his shoulders eased, fractionally, and Naruto decided to count that as a win. Sakura took first watch as promised, sitting near the mouth of their small hollow with a kunai loose in her hand, eyes scanning the darkening tree line with the alert, focused attention Naruto had always privately admired in her. The same intensity she brought to her studies applied now to the considerably higher stakes task of keeping her team alive through the night. Naruto lay back against the cool stone of the outcropping, staring up at the scattered fragments of darkening sky visible through gaps in the canopy, and found sleep slower to come than he'd expected given the exhaustion in his limbs. His mind kept circling back to the day's events, the ambush, the fight, the particular vividness of Sasuke's crimson eyes locked onto their opponent, the strange metallic tension that had followed the Kiri team's abrupt retreat. 5 days, he thought. We've barely made it through half of one. Somewhere in the darkness beyond their hollow, something large moved through the underbrush, and Naruto's whole body tensed before the sound faded, moving away rather than toward them, and he made himself breathe out slowly, forcing the tension from his shoulders. It's fine, he told himself. We're fine. We got through today. We'll get through tomorrow too. He didn't quite believe it, not entirely, some deep, animal instinct in him recognizing, the way it always seemed to in moments of real danger, that this forest held something considerably worse than 3 overconfident genin from a rival team. But he pushed the thought down regardless, focusing instead on the steady, reassuring sound of Sakura's quiet breathing nearby, the low murmur of the forest settling into whatever passed for its version of night, and eventually, despite everything, exhaustion won out over unease, and he slept. He did not know, as he drifted off, that less than a day's travel away, a figure with pale skin and slitted, golden eyes had already begun to take notice of Team 7, had marked the boy with whisker-marked cheeks and the boy with the still-dormant bloodline of a nearly extinguished clan, and was already, patiently, moving to intercept them. The forest, ancient and indifferent, kept its silence around all of them alike, and gave no warning at all of what the next day would bring. Sasuke took over the watch precisely 2 hours later, as promised, easing Sakura gently by the shoulder until her eyes blinked open, heavy with the particular reluctance of someone dragged too soon from real sleep. Anything? He asked quietly, settling into the spot she vacated near the mouth of the hollow. Nothing, she murmured, already curling toward the stone wall, eyes drifting shut again almost before she'd finished the word. Quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but nothing moved on us. Sasuke nodded, though she was already asleep and couldn't see it, and turned his attention outward. The forest at night was a different creature entirely from the one they'd navigated through daylight. What had been merely dim and oppressive in the afternoon became something close to absolute, the canopy overhead swallowing what little moonlight might otherwise have filtered down, leaving Sasuke to rely on senses other than sight, the shift of air currents, the particular textures of sound that told him whether a rustle was wind or something with intent behind its movement. His thoughts, in the stillness, kept circling back to the Sharingan. To the moment in the clearing when the world had seemed to slow, when he'd watched the Earth user's muscles tense a fraction of a second before each strike, had read the coming attack in the set of the boy's shoulders before the boy himself seemed to fully commit to it. It should have felt like triumph. His clan's bloodline, awakened at last, exactly as it was meant to, as a tool of survival, a weapon passed down through generations for exactly this purpose. Instead it had felt like grief with a new face on it. Every time those eyes opened, some small, unwelcome part of him thought of his brother, of a night he tried very hard, most days, not to think about at all. He wondered, distantly, staring out into the black tangle of trees, whether that feeling would ever fade, or whether it was simply the price the Sharingan demanded in exchange for its gifts. He did not examine that thought for very long. There would be time for it later being, in Sasuke's private accounting, a vague and distant point he could keep pushing further away for as long as the demands of the present kept him sufficiently occupied. And the present, tonight, was simple enough: watch the tree line, keep his team alive, get through the next 2 hours. Nothing moved against them. A few times he thought he caught the distant, arrhythmic calls of some large nocturnal bird, and once, far off, a low, guttural sound that might have been some enormous animal marking territory, but nothing came near enough to threaten the hollow. When his own 2 hours drew to a close, he woke Naruto with a light shake to the shoulder, the same courtesy Sakura had shown him. My turn? Naruto mumbled, blinking blearily up at him. Your turn, Sasuke confirmed. Nothing happened. Stay alert anyway. Always do, Naruto said, which was, Sasuke privately thought, only about 60% true, but he let it go and settled down in the spot Naruto had vacated, closing his eyes, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with him now that someone else's watchful attention stood between his team and the dark. Naruto's watched past in restless quiet. He sat near the mouth of the hollow much as Sakura and Sasuke had before him, kunai in hand, eyes adjusting slowly to the deep dark of the forest at its lowest hour, and found his mind, without his willing it, drifting back over the events of the day in a loose, half-formed tangle of thought. The fight replayed itself in fragments, the jarring impact of that gauntlet fist against his jaw, the cold fear that had gripped him watching Sakura stumble back under the bandana girl's relentless assault, the strange, fierce satisfaction of finally landing a solid hit after so many failed attempts. He thought, too, of Sasuke's eyes, crimson and spinning, and felt the familiar, complicated knot of feeling that always seemed to accompany any reminder of just how far ahead of him Sasuke remained. Despite all of Naruto's training, all his effort, all the stubborn refusal to accept that some gap between them might simply be unbridgeable. I'll catch up, he thought, the way he always thought it, fierce and half-desperate. Somehow. I don't care what it takes. He didn't know, sitting there in the dark with no warning at all of what was coming, just how literally that thought was about to be tested, or what strange, unprecedented shape his answer to it would take before the sun set on tomorrow. The hours crept by. Somewhere in the deep black beyond the hollow, something enormous shifted its weight against the earth, far enough away that Naruto couldn't be sure he hadn't imagined it, and closer to dawn, the first faint traces of gray beginning to creep into the sky overhead, he thought he heard, very briefly, very faintly, and gone again almost before he registered it, the papery, unnatural hiss of something that did not sound like any animal he knew. He sat up a little straighter, scanning the tree line with sharpened attention, kunai held ready. But the sound didn't repeat, and after several long, tense minutes, he allowed himself to relax, chalking it up to nerves and an overactive imagination fed by a day of far too much genuine danger. He did not wake Sakura or Sasuke to mention it. In hindsight later, he would wish very much that he had. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the canopy in thin, reluctant shafts, and Naruto woke his teammates as the forest around them stirred back into its daytime rhythm of birdsong and rustling undergrowth, the deceptive ordinariness of morning settling over a place that had, the day before, so thoroughly proven itself anything but ordinary. Morning, he said, as Sakura blinked awake, and then Sasuke, both of them stretching out the stiffness of an uncomfortable night's sleep against unforgiving stone. Nothing happened on my watch. Well, nothing I could see anyway. Sakura paused in the middle of repacking her supply pouch, glancing at him sharply. What do you mean, nothing you could see? Just, I dunno. Thought I heard something weird right before dawn. Probably nothing. Sasuke's eyes narrowed slightly, some of the same wary alertness from the previous day's encounter with the fleeing Kiri team settling back over his expression. Weird how? I don't know how to describe it, Naruto admitted, a little sheepish now, wondering if he'd overreacted to nothing at all. Kind of a hissing sound. Papery, almost. It didn't repeat, so I figured it was nothing. Sakura and Sasuke exchanged a brief, unreadable look. Let's just be careful today, Sakura said finally, tightening the strap on her supply pouch with more force than strictly necessary. More careful than yesterday, if that's possible. Right, Naruto said, and found that despite the gray, ordinary light of morning filtering down through the ancient trees, the uneasy prickle along the back of his neck from the night before hadn't entirely faded. They ate a quick, quiet breakfast, checked their gear, and set off once more into the depths of the forest of death, northeast, toward the tower, toward the heaven and earth scrolls that would carry them through to the third exam, and towards something none of them could have anticipated, waiting patiently in the trees ahead, golden eyes already fixed on the small, unsuspecting shape of Team 7 as it moved deeper into the forest's ancient, watching dark. The second day in the Forest of Death began the way the first had ended, with a low, persistent unease that none of them could quite name, and none of them could quite shake. Team 7 moved northeast in careful, deliberate silence, the memory of yesterday's fight still fresh enough in their aching limbs that no one suggested anything but caution. Sakura kept her compass close at hand, checking their heading every few hundred meters. Sasuke led at a measured pace, eyes constantly flicking between the trees ahead and the ground beneath them, alert for traps and chakra signatures alike. And Naruto, walking a half-step behind them both, found himself scanning the canopy far more than he usually would. The memory of that strange papery hiss from before dawn still lodged somewhere in the back of his mind like a splinter he couldn't quite dig out. "You're doing it again," Sakura said, glancing back at him. "Doing what?" "Staring up at the trees like they personally offended you." "I keep thinking about that sound," Naruto admitted. "It's probably nothing. But it's bugging me." "It's probably nothing," Sasuke agreed, though something in his tone suggested he didn't fully believe it either. "But we should keep moving anyway. Standing around worrying about it doesn't help." They pressed on. The forest around them had shifted subtly since the day before, the trees, if anything, growing even larger, their roots buckling the earth into steep, uneven ridges that forced the team to pick their way carefully rather than simply run in a straight line toward their destination. Shafts of pale morning light broke through the canopy in scattered patches, illuminating drifting motes of pollen and insect wings, and if it weren't for the lingering ache in Naruto's jaw and the thin, half-healed cut along Sakura's cheek, it might almost have been possible to forget, for a few minutes at a stretch, just how dangerous this place actually was. An hour into their travel, they paused at a narrow stream to refill canteens, the same careful ritual as the day before, Sakura testing the water's clarity, purifying it with the small jutsu she'd drilled into habit, while Sasuke kept watch and Naruto sat with his back against the tree, flexing his bruised forearm and grumbling under his breath about how much it still ached. "You'd think a day would be enough to heal a bruise," he muttered. "Not every injury heals on your schedule, Naruto," Sakura said, not unkindly, capping her canteen and tucking it away. "Be glad it's just bruising. Yesterday could have gone a lot worse." I know. He rolled his shoulder experimentally, wincing. "Still. Feels like it's taking forever." Sasuke, crouched near the tree line with his attention fixed outward, spoke without turning. "We should keep moving. We spent too much time recovering yesterday evening. We're behind where we should be if we want any buffer before the deadline." "We had to recover," Sakura pointed out. "We'd just been in a fight." "I know. I'm not criticizing. Just, we can't afford many more delays." There was something clipped in his tone, a thread of tension that hadn't quite been there the day before, and Sakura and Naruto exchanged a brief, wordless glance before rising to follow him back onto the trail. They passed, over the next hour, several more signs of the forest's ongoing violence. A scorched patch of undergrowth where some fire-natured jutsu had clearly been unleashed and left to burn itself out. A scattering of shredded cloth, unidentifiable as to which village it might have belonged to, caught in the low branches of a bush like some grim, accidental decoration. Once, disturbingly, the sound of raised voices somewhere off to their left, cut short abruptly in a way that made all three of them go still and silent until several minutes had passed without any further disturbance. "We're not the only ones having a rough time of this," Naruto said quietly, once they'd resumed walking. "No," Sasuke agreed. "We're not." It was nearing midday, the light overhead having climbed to its highest point though still filtered dim and green through the canopy, when they came across the girl. She was sitting with her back against the base of an enormous tree, one leg drawn up and cradled carefully, as though favoring an injury, a Kusagakure headband tied loosely around her neck rather than her forehead. Her posture was slumped, tired, the posture of someone who had clearly had a rough go of the last day and a half, and when she caught sight of Team 7 approaching, her whole body went taut with visible alarm. "Please, wait," she called out, both hands raised, palms open, in the universal gesture of someone signaling they meant no harm. "I'm not looking for a fight. My team scattered yesterday, I lost track of them, and I think I twisted my ankle pretty badly trying to get away from something in the underbrush." Sasuke's hand came up in the same sharp signal as before, stop, and the three of them halted several meters back, wary. Show us your hands, Sasuke said, voice flat and even. Slowly, the girl complied at once, lifting both hands higher, fingers spread. I don't want trouble, she said again, a slight tremor in her voice that could have been genuine fear or could have been very good acting. Naruto couldn't tell, and judging by the careful, unreadable expression on Sasuke's face, either could he. I just need help. Or, if you can help, that's fine too, just please don't hurt me. I've had enough of that already. What happened to your team? Sakura asked, kunai still loosely in hand but not raised. We got ambushed, the girl said. A team from AIM, I think. 2 of my teammates went down. I don't know if they're alive. I ran. I know that's not exactly noble, but I panicked. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. I've been trying to find my way back toward the tower ever since, but with this ankle, I haven't gotten far. Naruto felt a familiar tug of sympathy. The story wasn't so different from the kind of desperate scramble any of them might find themselves in, and the girl's fears seemed real enough. But something about the whole scene nagged at him in a way he couldn't quite articulate, a low, wordless static of wrongness that he associated, uncomfortably, with the same instinct that had kept him up half of last night listening for a sound that never repeated. We should help her, he said quietly, glancing at his teammates. Maybe, Sakura said, equally quiet, not taking her eyes off the girl. But carefully. Sasuke said nothing for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the girl with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably under it. What village is your team from again? Kusugakure, the girl said. Hidden Grass. We're not exactly a major village, I know, most people barely know we exist. Another small, nervous laugh. But we train just as hard as anyone. And your teammates, Sasuke pressed. What are their names? The girl blinked, something flickering behind her eyes too quickly for Naruto to name. Does that matter right now? I really think my ankle needs looking at, and if there are enemies nearby. It matters, Sasuke said, because if we're going to help you, I want to know who we might be walking into a fight to protect. There was a pause, brief, but long enough that Naruto felt the hair on the back of his neck rise, before the girl answered, a shade too smoothly. Kid and Toru. Kid's the one I'm most worried about. She took a nasty hit before I ran. All right, Sasuke said, and something in his posture eased, just slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. We'll help you back toward the tower. But you stay in front of us, where we can see you. The girl exhaled, visibly relieved, and offered a wobbly smile. Thank you? Really? I didn't think anyone would stop. Naruto crouched a little to study the girl's ankle, though he had no real medical training to speak of, mostly out of the same restless need to be doing something useful that drove most of his actions. It looked, to his untrained eye, plausibly swollen, reddened around the joint, held at an awkward angle that suggested genuine discomfort. He didn't know, then, how convincing a well-executed transformation technique could render even the smallest physical details, given enough skill and enough patience. That looks rough, he said. You're lucky you didn't break it outright, running from an ambush on ground like this. Lucky, the girl echoed, with a faint, wry twist to her mouth. That seems to be the theme of my day so far. Lucky I didn't break it. Lucky I got away at all. I keep telling myself the word doesn't feel like it fits, given the circumstances. Do you need a hand standing? Sakura asked, already moving closer, her instinct to help overriding whatever residual caution she might have carried from the day's earlier ambush. Please, the girl said, reaching up with one hand while keeping the injured leg carefully tucked beneath her. Sakura crouched, bracing herself, and helped haul the girl upright, feeling her lean heavily against her shoulder the moment she was standing, favoring the supposedly twisted ankle with a wince that looked, to Sakura's eye, entirely convincing. Up close, the girl smelled faintly of damp earth and something else Sakura couldn't quite place. Not unpleasant, exactly, just unfamiliar. In a way she filed away without quite registering its significance. What happened to the AIM team, exactly? Naruto asked, hanging back a step, unable to quite shake the low hum of unease that had settled over him since they'd first spotted the girl slumped against the tree. I didn't see much of it, the girl admitted, her voice carrying just the right note of remembered fear. It happened fast. 1 second we were scouting, The next there were 3 of them coming out of the trees at once. I grabbed what I could and ran. I feel awful about it, honestly. I keep thinking I should have stayed and fought. You did the smart thing, Sakura said gently, adjusting her grip to better support the girl's weight. Getting yourself somewhere safe isn't the same as abandoning your team. If your ankle's this bad, you'd have just been a liability in a fight anyway. That's a kind way to put it, the girl said, and something in the small, right twist of her mouth made Sakura's chest ache with sympathy. The particular guilt of a shinobi who'd survived when their teammates might not have. Sakura moved forward to help her up fully, careful and steady, one arm braced under the girl's shoulder to take the weight off her supposedly injured ankle, and the group set off once more, slower now, the girl limping convincingly between them, Naruto and Sasuke flanking on either side, weapons not drawn but close at hand. So, Naruto said, after a stretch of quiet that felt a little too heavy for his taste, how long were you guys in the forest before you got jumped? Since the exam started, same as you, I'd imagine, the girl said, wincing slightly as her weight shifted onto the supposedly injured ankle. We'd actually been doing alright until yesterday evening. Found an earth scroll almost immediately, if you can believe it. Some unlucky team practically walked right into us. Lucky, Sakura said. I thought so too, until it stopped being lucky. A faint, self-deprecating smile. Should have known good fortune in this forest doesn't last. What scroll do you have, then? Sasuke asked, his tone carefully neutral, though Naruto caught the slight sharpening of his attention at the question. If your team scattered, did you manage to keep it? There was the faintest pause, barely perceptible, easy to miss if you weren't listening for it, before the girl answered. Earth scroll, yes. I grabbed it before I ran. Small mercy, I suppose, though it won't do much good if I can't find my teammates or make it to the tower on this ankle. We can help with that, Sakura said, kind as ever, adjusting her grip to better support the girl's weight as they picked their way over an uneven ridge of exposed root. Once we get you somewhere safer, we can splint that ankle properly. It won't heal the ligament, but it'll let you put weight on it without making things worse. You know some field medicine? The girl asked, sounding genuinely curious now, glancing sideways at Sakura with an expression that, in hindsight, held just a shade too much clinical interest for someone supposedly still shaken from an ambush. A little, Sakura said. I've been studying it independently. Figured it might come in useful. Clever, the girl said. Most genin your age don't think that far ahead. Sakura thinks about everything, Naruto put in, a note of genuine pride slipping into his voice despite the tension still humming under his skin. She had this whole forest survival plan mapped out before we even got here. Did she? The girl said, and something in her tone, faint, almost imperceptible, but there, made the hair on the back of Naruto's neck prickle without his quite understanding why. He glanced at her again, and this time, in a stray shaft of light breaking through the canopy, he caught something that made his stomach drop straight through the forest floor. Her tongue, flicking briefly out to wet dry lips in an entirely ordinary, human gesture, was too long, far too long, and where it caught the light for just a fraction of a second, it seemed to shimmer with something that wasn't quite the texture of ordinary flesh at all. He didn't say anything. He didn't dare. But his hand drifted, slow and careful, toward the kunai at his hip, and beside him, he felt rather than saw Sasuke go very still, having clearly noticed the same thing at almost the same instant. Something's wrong, Sasuke breathed, so quietly Naruto almost missed it, angling his head as if adjusting his stance rather than speaking. I know, Naruto murmured back, just as quiet. Her tongue. Did you? I saw it. Ahead of them, Sakura, still supporting the girl's weight, seemed oblivious to the exchange, her attention fixed on navigating the uneven terrain rather than on her teammates' sudden, silent tension. Naruto's mind raced, trying to piece together what he'd just seen with everything Anko had warned them about, everything Kakashi's unusually serious tone had hinted at back at the gate, that quiet, uncharacteristic gravity that had settled over their sensei's single visible eye when he told them to disengage from anything that felt wrong. This feels wrong, Naruto thought, his pulse picking up, his hand tightening slowly around the hilt of his kunai. This feels very, very wrong. Genjutsu, animal mimicry, disguise traps. Don't assume anything is what it looks like. If you encounter anything that seems unusually powerful, anything that doesn't feel like an ordinary genin team or an ordinary animal, disengage. We need to get Sakura away from her, Sasuke breathed, barely audible. Now, before the world went cold. It happened all at once, a wave of pressure crashing down over the small clearing like a physical weight, thick and suffocating. Chakra so dense and so malevolent that Naruto's knees very nearly buckled beneath him, his vision swimming, every instinct in his body screaming at him to run, to scream, to do anything except stand there in the presence of whatever had just announced itself. It was nothing like the killing intent Kakashi had demonstrated on their very first day as a team, that long-ago bell test that felt now like it belonged to some other, gentler lifetime. That had been a controlled thing, a lesson, frightening but bounded, the way a controlled burn was frightening but bounded. This had no boundaries at all. It felt ancient and patient, and entirely without mercy, the kind of pressure that made Naruto's body remember, on some level far beneath conscious thought, that it was built of meat and bone, and could be ended very easily by whatever had just made its presence known. Birds that had been calling somewhere in the canopy went silent all at once. Even the insects seemed to still. The whole forest, for one suspended, endless moment, held its breath along with the three of them. Sakura went rigid, the girl's arms still looped over her shoulder, her face draining of color so fast Naruto thought for one terrible moment she might simply collapse where she stood. A strangled sound escaped her throat, and her kunai clattered from suddenly nerveless fingers to the forest floor. Sakura! Naruto's own voice came out strangled, his limbs leaden, every step toward her feeling like wading through deep water. The girl beside her was smiling now, and it was not the frightened, grateful smile of a moment before. It was wide and slow and utterly, chillingly wrong, stretching across her face in a way that made Naruto's stomach lurch with visceral, animal revulsion. My, it said in a voice that had shifted, subtly but unmistakably, into something lower and colder than the frightened tone from before. Three little genin, so eager to help a stranger in the woods. How refreshingly naive. Get away from her! Naruto forced the words out, forced his body to obey, lunging forward despite the crushing weight of killing intent still bearing down on all three of them. The girl, the thing wearing the girl's face, released Sakura without resistance, letting her stumble free and collapse to her knees, gasping, one hand pressed flat against her chest as though trying to physically hold her own heart in place. Sasuke had already moved, putting himself between Sakura and the enemy, kunai drawn, though even from where Naruto stood he could see the faint tremor running through his teammate's hand. There's no need for hostility, the figure said, straightening from its slumped, injured posture in one smooth, unnervingly fluid motion that bore no resemblance whatsoever to a twisted ankle. I only wanted to see what you were made of. The transformation, when it came, was almost lazy in its pacing, skin rippling and reshaping like water disturbed by a dropped stone, the girl's features melting away to reveal something far more unsettling beneath, pale, sickly skin stretched over sharp, angular features, slitted golden eyes that seemed to drink in the dim forest light rather than reflect it, and a long, dark tongue that flicked briefly out between thin lips before retreating. A kusa headband, the figure said conversationally, reaching up to remove the very accessory it had used to sell its disguise, letting it drop carelessly to the forest floor. Useful for blending in, though I suppose the disguise wasn't quite as convincing as I'd hoped, given how quickly you two caught on. Who are you? Sasuke demanded, voice tight but steady, his own eyes beginning to bleed toward crimson even as he spoke. Does it matter? The figure said. What matters, I think, is what you're capable of. Both of you. Golden eyes swept from Sasuke to Naruto and back again, cataloging, assessing, with the cold, clinical attention of someone examining livestock rather than facing armed opponents. The last Uchiha, awakening his Sharingan early. And the boy carrying something far older and far more dangerous sealed inside him. Naruto's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? The figure's smile widened, delighted, as though Naruto's confusion were the most amusing thing it had encountered all day. Oh, don't play coy with me, little fox. I can smell it on you, you know, that thick, roiling chakra just beneath the surface, straining against its cage. A slow, appreciative sound, almost a hum. The fourth Hokage's sealing work really was extraordinary. I'd love the chance to examine it more closely. Sasuke's kunai flashed, closing the distance in a burst of speed, but the figure sidestepped the strike with almost contemptuous ease, not even bothering to draw a weapon of its own. simply shifting its weight in a manner that turned Sasuke's committed lunge into empty air. "Focus, boy," the figure said, almost gently, as Sasuke recovered his stance, breathing hard. "I haven't even begun yet. Sasuke, don't." Sakura's voice cracked across the clearing, still on her knees, still fighting the after-effects of that suffocating pressure. But Sasuke didn't so much as glance back at her. His whole attention narrowed down to the pale, golden-eyed figure in front of him with the singular focus that always emerged in him when a fight demanded everything he had. "Your friend's advice is sound," the figure said, tilting its head with an air of genuine, unhurried curiosity, as though it had all the time in the world and fully intended to use it. "But I don't think you're the type to listen, are you? Not when there's something to prove." "I don't need to prove anything to you," Sasuke said, circling now, kunai held loose and ready, Sharingan tracking every small shift in the figure's stance. "No," the figure agreed. "You need to prove it to yourself. I can see it in you, that hunger. The particular hunger of someone who has spent every day since a certain terrible night wondering if he'll ever be enough." Its smile widened, slow and knowing. "I find that hunger fascinating, you know. It's rather useful, if properly cultivated." Something in Sasuke's expression flickered, a crack in the composed mask, there and gone in an instant, and he lunged again, faster this time, a real attack rather than a testing one. Kunai aimed in a strike meant to draw blood rather than simply gauge a reaction. What followed was less a fight than a slow, deliberate dismantling. Sasuke pressed the attack with everything his newly awakened Sharingan could offer him, reading the figure's movements, anticipating strikes, weaving through a rapid combination of taijutsu and shuriken that would have overwhelmed either of the genin they'd fought the day before within seconds. Against this opponent, none of it seemed to matter. The figure moved with a fluid, almost bored grace, evading or deflecting every strike with minimal effort, never once seeming to break a sweat, its golden eyes tracking Sasuke's every move with an unhurried, predatory patience. Sasuke tried a feint, a strike aimed high, meant to draw a guard upward before he dropped low for a sweep at the figure's legs, a combination that had worked reliably against every sparring partner he'd ever faced, including, on occasion, Kakashi himself in the rare moments their sensei deigned to spar seriously. The figure simply stepped through the feint as though it had been announced in advance, avoiding both strikes with a single, economical shift of its weight that left Sasuke overextended and momentarily off balance. "You're thinking in patterns," the figure observed, almost kindly, as though offering genuine instruction rather than mockery. "Good patterns for a genin, but patterns are only useful against opponents who haven't already seen 1,000 versions of the exact same combination." "Then stop dodging and actually fight me," Sasuke snarled, recovering his footing and pressing forward again, faster now, abandoning the feint in favor of a more direct, relentless assault, strike after strike, testing every angle, every opening, refusing to give the figure a single moment's respite. "Better," it murmured, after Sasuke landed a glancing blow that drew a thin line of blood along one pale forearm, the first mark either of the boys had managed to leave in the entire exchange. "Much better than I expected from a genin fresh off his first awakening. The Uchiha blood does run true." "Shut up," Sasuke snarled, pressing forward again, but this time the figure's counter came faster than anything before it, a single, contemptuous strike that caught Sasuke across the ribs and sent him crashing backward into the trunk of a tree hard enough to crack bark, the breath driven from his lungs in a single, ragged gasp. "Sasuke!" Sakura's voice, thin with terror, still trembling from the after-effects of the killing intent that had washed over her moments before. Naruto didn't think. He hurled himself forward, hands already flying through the seal for his signature technique, and a dozen clones burst into existence around the clearing, all of them converging on the pale, golden-eyed figure in a chaotic, multi-angled assault that had, against every other opponent Naruto had faced so far, proven devastatingly effective. For one brief, electric moment, it almost seemed to work. The clones swarmed in from every direction at once, a wall of identical orange jackets and grim, determined expressions, kunai and fists flashing in a coordinated storm of motion that would have buried a lesser opponent under sheer numbers alone. Naruto felt a flicker of something like hope kindle in his chest, watching a dozen versions of himself converge on the single, still figure standing at the center of the chaos. It proved nothing of the sort here. The figure moved once, a single, almost casual gesture, a sweep of one arm trailing a faint shimmer of chakra, and every clone in the clearing dispersed simultaneously in a cascade of smoke, as though the technique itself had simply been switched off rather than defeated through any conventional means. Interesting, the figure said, as if commenting on the weather, while Naruto stared in open horror at the empty clearing where a dozen copies of himself had been standing a heartbeat before. The shadow clone technique, at your age, already at that scale. Whoever trained you clearly saw something worth investing in. What are you? Naruto managed, backing up a step, every instinct in his body screaming that this was exactly the kind of threat Kakashi had warned them about. The kind you were supposed to run from, not fight. Curious, aren't we? The figure's smile sharpened, its golden eyes narrowing with something that might have been anticipation. Very well. Since you asked so nicely, it moved. Naruto had fought fast opponents before. Sasuke himself, even, in their sparring sessions, moved with a speed that had once seemed nearly impossible to track. This was different. This was not fast in the way a trained shinobi was fast. This was fast in the way a striking snake was fast, a blur of motion that closed the distance between them before Naruto had so much as registered the figure's initial shift in stance, and then pale fingers closed around his throat and lifted him bodily off the ground. Naruto! Sakura's scream tore through the clearing. Let's see, the figure murmured, close enough now that Naruto could see the faint, snake-like slit of its pupils, could smell something sour and unnatural beneath the ordinary scent of forest loam. Exactly how deep that seal really runs. Pain exploded through Naruto's midsection, sharp and sudden and utterly unlike anything he'd experienced in either of the fights he'd survived so far. Not a strike, not quite, but something that felt like the figure's fingers were pressing not against his skin but directly into the fabric of whatever lay beneath it, probing at something Naruto had no name for and no defense against. He screamed. He couldn't help it. The pain was total, all-consuming, radiating outward from somewhere deep in his gut in waves that left him thrashing uselessly in the figure's iron grip, dimly aware of Sasuke shouting something, of Sakura's voice cracking with terror, of the whole world narrowing down to nothing but that white-hot agony and the golden, delighted eyes watching him suffer with the clinical fascination of a man conducting an experiment he'd been anticipating for a very long time. Somewhere in the depths of that agony, distant and strange, Naruto thought he felt something else stir, something vast and hot and furious, pressing up against the pain from the inside as though in answer to whatever was being done to him from without. It wasn't comforting. If anything, it frightened him more than the pain itself, a low, resonant growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, some enormous presence shifting restlessly at the very edge of his awareness like a beast straining against bars it had tested 1,000 times before and never yet broken. Not now, some small, terrified part of him thought, though he couldn't have said whether he was pleading with the pain, or with the figure holding him, or with whatever was stirring in the darkness beneath his own ribs. Please, not now. Oh, the figure breathed, something like genuine excitement entering its voice for the first time, its grip tightening fractionally as though it too had felt that distant, furious stirring and found it delicious rather than alarming. Oh, this is remarkable. The seal is stronger than I anticipated, resisting even direct manipulation. Whatever containment method the fourth used, it's holding admirably, even under this much pressure. Stop. Naruto managed to gasp out, the word barely more than a broken whisper, his vision fracturing at the edges into swimming black spots. Please, almost done, the figure said, with the detached, almost soothing tone of someone reassuring a child through an unpleasant but necessary medical procedure, utterly indifferent to the actual suffering behind the request. I only need a little more. Let him go! Sasuke's voice, ragged with fury and pain, and then the figure was forced to release its grip as a kunai, thrown with more raw desperation than precision, grazed close enough to its temple to draw blood, and Naruto crashed to the forest floor, gasping, his vision swimming, every nerve in his body still screaming from whatever had just been done to him. He didn't remember, afterward, exactly how he found the strength to move. Some distant, animal part of him simply refused to stay down, dragging his battered body up onto hands and knees despite the agony still radiating through his midsection, despite the black spots crowding the edges of his vision. The figure had turned its attention back to Sasuke, and this time there was no lazy amusement in its posture at all. Something colder, more purposeful, had settled over its expression. as though whatever it had learned from its assault on Naruto had crystallized some decision already forming in its mind. "The fox will keep," it murmured, almost to itself. "But you, little Uchiha, you, I think, are worth investing in properly." Sasuke, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his ribs where the earlier blow had landed, raised his kunai in a hand that visibly shook. "Stay away from me?" Now, the figure said, and there was something almost gentle in its tone now, deceptively so. "I'm offering you a gift. Power beyond anything your clan's bloodline alone could ever provide. All you have to do is survive what comes with it." "I don't want anything from you," Sasuke snarled, and lunged. It was, in retrospect, exactly the reaction the figure had been counting on. It sidestepped the strike with the same contemptuous ease as before, and this time, rather than simply deflecting or countering, its hand shot forward and closed around Sasuke's neck, forcing his head back to expose the pale line of his throat. "Sasuke!" Sakura's scream, and then she was moving too, throwing herself forward despite everything, despite the killing intent that had nearly paralyzed her only minutes before, kunai raised in a desperate, doomed attempt to intervene. The figure didn't even look at her. A flick of its free hand sent a wave of chakra-laced pressure crashing outward that knocked Sakura from her feet before she'd covered half the distance, sending her sprawling hard against the exposed roots of a nearby tree, where she crumpled, stunned and gasping, unable to rise. "Let go of me," Sasuke ground out, hands scrabbling uselessly at the pale fingers locked around his throat, his Sharingan still spinning, still tracking, and utterly unable to translate any of that borrowed sight into an escape. "I don't want your power. I don't want anything from you, don't you?" the figure asked, and there was something almost sad in the question, some strange echo of genuine curiosity beneath the menace. "I think you do. I think you've wanted it for years now, wanted something, anything, that might close the distance between the boy you are and the boy you believe you're supposed to become. I'm simply offering to speed along a process you'd have pursued regardless, one way or another, for the rest of your life." "Shut up," Sasuke snarled, though the words came out strangled, thin with the pressure still constricting his throat. "You don't know anything about me." "I know everything I need to," the figure said, almost gently, and its golden eyes, for just a moment, seemed to soften into something almost like sympathy, a monstrous, hollow imitation of the real thing, but unsettling all the same for how convincing it was. "This will hurt," it added conversationally, "but then, growth generally does." Its head dipped, impossibly fast, and its teeth, far sharper and far longer than any human teeth had any right to be, sank into the curve of Sasuke's neck. Sasuke's scream tore through the clearing, raw and agonized, and Naruto, still on hands and knees a few meters away, felt something in his chest crack open at the sound of it. Horror, and fury, and a desperate, animal need to do something even though every part of his body was screaming that he had nothing left to give. He moved anyway. His body did not want to obey him. Every muscle screamed with the aftershock of whatever had just been done to him, his vision still swimming at the edges, his arm hanging useless and aching where the figure's grip had wrenched it, and some small, exhausted, entirely reasonable part of him understood, distantly, that he had absolutely nothing left to offer a fight against an opponent who had shrugged off a dozen shadow clones without visible effort. It didn't matter. It had never mattered, not once in his entire life, whether the reasonable part of him understood how outmatched he was. Not on the day he first decided to become Hokage despite an entire village's quiet certainty that he'd amount to nothing, not in any of the countless smaller fights since, and not now, watching Sasuke's scream tear through the clearing while pale, gleaming teeth sank deeper into his neck. "Get up," he told his own body, with a fury that had nothing rational behind it at all. Get up, get up, get up. He didn't have a plan. He barely had coherent thought, at that point, just the singular, overriding drive to close the distance between himself and the figure currently sinking its teeth into his teammate's throat, and he threw himself forward with the last reserves of strength his battered body could muster, kunai raised in a strike that had no finesse behind it at all, nothing but raw, desperate intent. The figure released Sasuke almost lazily, letting him crumple to the ground, and turned to face Naruto's incoming strike with an expression of mild, almost curious amusement. Persistent, it observed, and caught Naruto's wrist mid-strike with contemptuous ease, twisting it hard enough that Naruto heard something in his own arm crack. white-hot pain lancing up to his shoulder as the kunai clattered uselessly from suddenly nerveless fingers. "You should have stayed down," the figure said, almost gently, and its other hand came around, chakra gathering visibly around its fingers in a way that made every instinct in Naruto's battered body scream that whatever came next was going to be very, very bad. The strike, when it landed, drove clean through Naruto's side. There was no pain, at first, only a strange, distant sense of pressure, of wrongness, the world tilting sideways as his legs gave out beneath him and he crumpled to the forest floor in a heap. The pain came a half-second later, a delayed, catastrophic wave of it that tore a strangled sound from his throat, and when he looked down, dazed and disbelieving, he saw dark blood, far too much of it, spreading rapidly across the front of his jacket. "Naruto!" Sakura's voice, from somewhere very far away, and the sound of her scrambling upright despite her own battered body, despite everything. The figure straightened, examining its blood-slicked fingers with the same detached, clinical curiosity it had shown throughout the entire encounter, apparently satisfied with whatever conclusion it had drawn, seemingly as unbothered by the blood coating its hand as it might have been by a smear of paint or dust, something to be noted and then dismissed, rather than any cause for concern or reflection. "That should do," it murmured. "The seal held even under direct assault. Remarkable work, truly. But the boy himself is still just a genin's body, whatever sealed inside it. A pity in its way. I'd have liked more time to study the containment method properly." Its golden eyes flicked toward Sasuke, still crumpled and gasping on the forest floor, one hand clutched to the fresh wound at his neck, a strange, dark marking already beginning to spread visibly across his skin like ink dropped into water. "But I have what I need from this encounter. What did you do to him?" Sakura's voice cracked, raw with terror, as she scrambled between her two fallen teammates, unable to decide which to reach first, unable to do anything at all against an opponent this far beyond her. "A gift," the figure said. "Or a curse, depending on how he chooses to use it. That will be up to him, in time." It paused, tilting its head slightly, something almost thoughtful in its expression as it regarded the scene before it. One boy bleeding out from a wound that would kill an ordinary genin within minutes, another marked with something dark and unnatural spreading beneath his skin, and a third, uninjured but utterly overwhelmed, kneeling helplessly between them. "You won't get away with this," Sakura said, though her voice shook badly, though she had no weapon raised, no strategy, nothing but raw, desperate defiance standing between her team and whatever this monster intended next. "Won't I?" The figure tilted its head, regarding her with an expression that held no malice at all now, only the same detached, faintly curious interest it had shown throughout, as though her defiance were simply one more data point to be catalogued alongside everything else it had learned today. "You're the one who kept your head, you know. Through all of it. Your teammates fought harder, perhaps, but you're the one who never stopped thinking, never stopped looking for an opening even when you had none to find. That's rarer than raw talent, in my experience. Rarer, and in its way, more dangerous." "I don't want your opinion," Sakura spat, though something in her chest twisted at the strange, unwanted validation buried in the words. "No," the figure agreed. "I don't imagine you do." Nevertheless. It straightened fully, glancing once more at the two fallen boys with an expression Sakura could not read at all, satisfaction, perhaps, or something colder and more patient than mere satisfaction. "I already have gotten away with it," it said, answering her original accusation at last. "But don't worry yourself too much, little medic. I have no further interest in you, or in finishing what I've started here. Whether your teammates survive this forest is entirely up to the three of you now." It turned unhurried, already beginning to melt back into the shadows between the ancient trees, its form seeming to blur and thin at the edges in a way that made Naruto's already swimming vision protest violently at trying to track it. "Do give the fox my regards," it said, almost as an afterthought, glancing back over one pale shoulder with an expression of terrible, patient amusement, "when he wakes." And then it was gone, swallowed entirely into the deep green shadow of the forest, leaving behind only the ringing silence of its absence, and the wreckage of what it had left in its wake. The clearing, in the sudden vacuum left by the figure's departure, felt almost unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals, nothing but the ragged, uneven sound of three genins breathing and the soft, terrible drip of blood soaking into the forest floor. The oppressive weight of killing intent that had crushed down over the space only minutes before had lifted entirely, leaving behind a hollow, exhausted stillness that felt, if anything, almost worse for its emptiness, as though the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting to see whether anyone in this particular clearing would still be breathing by the time it dared to exhale. For a long, frozen moment, Sakura simply knelt there, unable to make her body move, unable to process the scale of what had just happened in the span of what could not have been more than a few minutes. Her ears were ringing faintly, some after effect of the killing intent that had washed over the clearing, and the whole scene in front of her had the strange, dreamlike unreality of something that couldn't possibly be happening, not to her team, not on the second day of an exam that was supposed to test their skills, not their lives. Then Naruto made a small, wet, agonized sound, and something in her snapped back into focus with brutal, immediate clarity. Naruto, Naruto, stay with me, okay? She scrambled to his side, hands already fumbling for the medical supplies in her pouch, years of academy training and independent study collapsing down into pure, desperate muscle memory. The wound in his side was bad, far worse than anything she had any real training to treat, blood welling up dark and steady around her pressing hands no matter how hard she pushed. Sakura, Naruto managed, his voice slurred, his eyes struggling to focus on her face. Sook, is he? He's alive, she said, though she hadn't actually checked, hadn't had time, and the words came out more as desperate hope than confirmed fact. Stay still, don't talk, I need to stop this bleeding. She tore a strip from her own supply of bandages, packing it hard against the wound, applying pressure with both hands, her mind racing through every scrap of field medicine she'd ever studied and finding all of it woefully, terrifyingly inadequate to the scale of injury in front of her. Naruto's face had gone pale beneath his whisker marks, his breathing shallow and uneven, and every passing second felt like watching sand run out of an hourglass she had no way to refill. Think, she told herself, fighting down the rising tide of panic clawing at the edges of her composure. You've read the field manuals. You've practiced the pressure points. Elevate if you can, keep the wound packed. Don't let him go into shock if you can help it. Talk to me, she said, forcing her voice into something steadier than she felt, keeping one hand pressed hard against the bandage while the other found his wrist, checking his pulse. Too fast, too thin, but there, still there. Naruto, look at me. Stay awake. I'm trying, he mumbled, eyelids fluttering, and the sheer effort visible in that small, slurred response frightened her more than almost anything else in the last several minutes had. I know you are. Keep trying. She glanced over her shoulder, toward where Sasuke lay curled on his side a few feet away, one hand still pressed to the dark, spreading mark at his neck, his breathing ragged and uneven, small, involuntary sounds of pain escaping him every few seconds. She couldn't reach him without taking her hands off Naruto's wound, and taking her hands off Naruto's wound, even for a moment, felt like it might mean the difference between him breathing and not. Sasuke, she called, her voice cracking. Sasuke, can you hear me? A low, pained groan was the only answer, but it was an answer, and she clung to it. He was alive, at least, whatever else that terrible mark on his neck might be doing to him. Please, she whispered, to no one in particular, to whatever might be listening in the vast, indifferent forest around them, please, just hold on. Both of you, just hold on. She tore another strip of bandage, layering it over the first, pressing down with both hands and as much of her weight as she could manage without hurting him further, willing the bleeding to slow through sheer force of desperate concentration. Her own hands, she noticed distantly, were shaking badly, smeared dark with blood that wasn't hers, and some detached. Clinical corner of her mind noted that she was very likely in the early stages of shock herself and that this was, under the circumstances, an extremely inconvenient time for that particular problem to present itself. No, she told herself, fierce and desperate. Not now. They need you functioning. Fall apart later. Behind her, Sasuke made another low, pained sound curling further in on himself, and Sakura's attention split in an agony of divided priority. One teammate bleeding out in front of her, another writhing in pain she had no idea how to address, and no Jonin sensei, no reinforcements, nothing but her own two hands and a training that had never, not once, prepared her for anything close to this. She thought, briefly and viciously, of every lecture she'd ever half listened to at the academy about the realities of field medicine. Every time she told herself she'd study the material more thoroughly later, once she had more time, once the pressure of exams and training had eased. There had never been more time. There had only ever been this, the actual, unforgiving moment when everything she hadn't learned yet mattered more than anything she had. Hold on, she said again, to both of them, to herself, her voice cracking under the weight of it. Just please hold on. I'm not losing either of you. Not here. Not like this. The dark marking on Sasuke's neck pulsed, once, with a faint, unnatural light, visible even in the dim, filtered daylight of the clearing, and Sakura felt a fresh wave of cold dread wash through her at the sight of it. Whatever that thing was, whatever it was doing to him, she had absolutely no idea how to counter it, no training, no reference point, nothing. Beneath her hands, Naruto's blood continued to soak through bandage after bandage, slower now, perhaps, though she couldn't be entirely sure whether that was genuine improvement, or simply her own exhausted hope deceiving her, and somewhere deep in the ancient, indifferent trees around them, something Sakura couldn't name, and wouldn't have believed if anyone had described it to her in advance, was already, faintly, beginning to stir. She didn't notice it yet, not the strange, subtle warmth beginning to radiate faintly from beneath her packed bandages, not the first, barely perceptible shift in the texture of the skin beneath Naruto's torn jacket. Her whole attention remained fixed on the simple, desperate arithmetic of keeping her teammates breathing for one more minute, and then the minute after that, with no way of knowing that the next few minutes were about to change everything she thought she understood about the boy bleeding out beneath her hands. Minutes passed in a blur of fraying concentration, Sakura's arms trembling from the sustained pressure, her knees aching from the awkward, half-crouched position she'd held for what felt like an eternity but couldn't have been more than a quarter of an hour. Sasuke's breathing had evened out slightly, though the dark, spreading mark at his neck still pulsed faintly every so often, and she had no idea whether that was a good sign or a very bad one. Naruto's pulse remained thin and rapid beneath her fingers, but it remained, stubborn and steady in its own thready way, refusing to give out entirely no matter how much blood had already soaked through the layers of bandage pressed against his side. Come on, she whispered, not entirely sure anymore whether she was speaking to Naruto, to Sasuke, or simply to whatever fragile thread of hope she was clinging to in the absence of anything more substantial. Come on, just a little longer. Someone will come. Kakashi-sensei will come. Just hold on a little longer. No one came, not yet. There was only the forest, ancient and indifferent, its canopy filtering the afternoon light down into the same dim, directionless green it had held all day, giving no sign at all of what waited in its depths, or of how close Team 7 had already come to losing everything within the first 2 days of an exam that still had 3 more to run. Overhead, unnoticed by any of them, a single leaf detached from its branch and spiraled slowly down to land, unremarked, on the toe of Naruto's sandal, ordinary in every visible respect, and yet the first small, quiet herald of something that had never before stirred in a boy like him, something that would not fully make itself known until the wound beneath Sakura's desperate hands had bled its very last, and something in Naruto refused, with a stubbornness far older than his 12 years, to let that be the end of his story. Whatever waited in the silence beneath that stubborn refusal had not yet found its shape. But it was listening now, in whatever strange way such things listen, to the frantic, unyielding rhythm of a heart that had decided, against every reasonable expectation the forest around it might have offered, that it was not yet finished beating. Time had stopped meaning anything useful to Sakura Haruno. She had no idea how long she had been kneeling in the churned, blood-soaked earth of that clearing, hands pressed hard against the sodden bandages at Naruto's side, her knees aching, her arms trembling with the effort of sustained pressure, her mind looping over the same handful of desperate, half-formed prayers. It might have been 10 minutes. It might have been 40. The light filtering down through the canopy had shifted, marginally, from the high, pale green of midday towards something a little warmer, a little more slanted, but she couldn't have said with any confidence how much of that shift represented real time passing and how much was simply her own exhausted perception playing tricks on her. Her body had begun to protest the sustained, awkward posture some time ago. A deep, burning ache settled into her thighs and lower back from crouching in the same position for so long. her forearms trembling with the effort of maintaining steady pressure against Naruto's wound, her fingers gone stiff and half-numb. She ignored all of it. There was no room, in the narrow, desperate focus that had swallowed her entire awareness, for anything as trivial as her own physical discomfort. What she did know, with a clarity that cut through everything else, was that both of her teammates were still breathing. That fact alone had become the entire architecture of her world, the only thing keeping her hands moving, her voice murmuring low, useless reassurances into air that offered nothing back. "You're doing okay," she told Naruto, for what might have been the 20th time, her voice hoarse and thin. "You're doing okay. Just keep breathing. That's all you have to do." He didn't answer. His eyes had drifted shut some time ago, his breathing shallow but mercifully, still steady in its ragged way, his pulse beneath her fingers thin and fast but present. The bleeding had slowed, she was almost certain of that much, though whether it was because her packed bandages were finally holding or because his body simply had less blood left to lose, she didn't want to examine too closely. Beside him, close enough that she could reach either boy without fully releasing pressure on Naruto's wound, Sasuke lay curled on his side, one hand still loosely curled near the dark, spreading mark at his neck, his breathing uneven, punctuated every so often by a low, pained sound that made Sakura's chest ache with helpless frustration. She had no idea what that mark was. She had no training, no reference point, nothing in any of the field manuals she'd studied that remotely resembled the strange, spreading pattern of dark lines radiating out from the bite at his throat like ink bleeding through wet paper. Every few minutes some small, treacherous part of her mind conjured up the memory of Kakashi's warning at the gate, the unusually serious note in his voice when he told them to disengage from anything that felt wrong, and she found herself wishing, uselessly, bitterly, that she'd somehow found a way to heed that warning sooner, as if there had ever been a version of events where three genin could have simply walked away from an opponent who had cornered them so completely, so effortlessly, before any of them had fully understood what they were facing. "I can't fix this," she thought, and the thought arrived with a clarity that felt almost peaceful in its total, devastating honesty. "I don't know how to fix any of this. I don't know how to fix either of them." She kept her hands pressed against Naruto's side anyway, because doing something, even something inadequate, felt marginally less unbearable than doing nothing at all. The forest around them had gone strange in the aftermath of the golden-eyed figure's departure, not silent, exactly, not in the way it had been during that suffocating wave of killing intent, but subdued, muted, as though even the ordinary creatures of the forest of death understood, on some instinctive level, that something significant and terrible had passed through this particular clearing and left its residue behind. Sakura found herself straining to listen past the ragged sound of her own breathing for any hint of approaching danger. Footsteps, voices, the telltale rustle of an ambush closing in on three genin who could not currently offer even a token defense. She had no illusions about what would happen if another team found them like this. An Earth Scroll and a Heaven Scroll, both theirs, both sitting uselessly in her supply pouch while she knelt helpless over two incapacitated teammates, would make them the single most attractive target in the entire forest of death. She thought briefly of trying to move them, of dragging first Naruto and then Sasuke to some more defensible position, some hollow or thicket where she might at least have walls at her back rather than open ground on every side. But the moment the thought formed, she recognized its futility. She had neither the strength nor the time to safely relocate two unconscious, badly injured teammates without risking exactly the kind of jostling that could reopen Naruto's wound entirely, and abandoning her pressure on that wound even for the several minutes such a move would require felt like an unacceptable gamble against the threat that remained, for now, only theoretical. So she stayed, kneeling in the open, exposed clearing, kunai within easy reach, every nerve stretched taut with the effort of listening for danger she had no real way of defending against if it arrived. Please, she thought, to whatever might be listening, not yet. Give us a little more time. Please. She didn't know, kneeling there in that churned and bloodied clearing, that her plea, desperate, wordless, born entirely of fear rather than any conscious understanding of what she was truly asking for, was about to be answered in a way that no field manual, no academy lecture, nothing in her entire education as a shinobi, had ever prepared her to witness. It began so subtly that Sakura almost missed it entirely. A faint warmth, first, not the fevered heat of infection, which she'd been dreading, watching for, certain that it was only a matter of time before Naruto's wound began to show the first ugly signs of it, but something different. Something that seemed to radiate not from the wound itself but from somewhere beneath it, deep in the muscle and bone, a low, steady warmth like sun-warmed earth rather than the dangerous heat of fever. She frowned, shifting her hands slightly against the bandages, trying to understand what she was feeling. Naruto? No response. His breathing remained steady, shallow, unchanged. She told herself it was nothing, residual chakra dispersing from whatever technique the attacker had used against him, perhaps, or simply her own exhausted hands misreading ordinary sensation after too long spent in one position. She had far more pressing things to worry about than a faint, inexplicable warmth, and she pushed the observation aside, returning her attention to the more immediate task of monitoring both boys' breathing. It was perhaps 2 or 3 minutes later that she felt it again, stronger this time, unmistakable, a warmth that had definitely intensified rather than faded, radiating outward from beneath her pressed hands in a way that made her pulse quicken with fresh alarm. Naruto, she said again, sharper now, lifting one hand just slightly to look beneath it, and immediately regretted the movement as a fresh trickle of blood welled up at the loosened pressure. She pressed back down immediately, cursing under her breath, but not before she'd caught a glimpse of something that made her breath catch in her throat. The skin around the edges of the wound, not the wound itself, which remained exactly as ugly and dangerous as it had been for the last however many minutes, but the skin surrounding it had taken on a strange, faintly textured quality, as though fine, hairline ridges had begun to trace themselves across its surface, pale lines just barely visible against Naruto's already pale, blood-loss-drained skin. What? Sakura breathed, staring, unable to fully process what she was looking at. What is that? She had no answer. She pressed her hand back down more firmly, some instinct telling her that whatever was happening, disturbing it further would only make things worse, and forced herself to focus on breathing slowly, evenly, fighting down the fresh spike of panic threatening to crest over her already fraying composure. It's fine, she told herself, with a conviction she didn't fully feel. It's probably some kind of chakra reaction. Blood loss can do strange things. It's fine. It was not, as it turned out, remotely fine, or rather, it was something far stranger and ultimately, far more fortunate than fine had any right to be. The warmth intensified again, faster now, and this time Sakura felt something else alongside it, a low, resonant hum, barely perceptible, that seemed to travel up through her palms and into her own arms, an odd, tingling sensation unlike anything she'd ever felt channeling her own chakra. Beneath her hands, through the layers of blood-soaked bandage, she felt something shift, not the wound itself, not exactly, but something adjacent to it, something moving with a slow, deliberate quality that had nothing in common with the erratic, involuntary twitches of an unconscious body. Naruto? Her voice had gone thin with fear now, all pretense of calm control abandoned. Naruto, can you hear me? What's happening? He didn't answer, couldn't, unconscious as he was, but his brow had furrowed slightly, some deep, unreachable part of him clearly registering, even in his current state, that something significant was occurring within his own body. Sakura lifted her hands, very carefully this time, bracing herself for another spike of bleeding, and stared down at what the movement revealed. Thin, pale filaments, no thicker than fine thread, had emerged from the edges of the wound itself, twining together in slow, deliberate patterns across the torn fabric of Naruto's jacket. Not blood, not any bodily fluid she recognized, but something that looked, impossibly, unmistakably, like the fine, hair-like roots of a growing plant, spreading outward from the wound with the same patient, inexorable growth pattern she'd observed 1,000 times in the greenhouse behind the Academy's herbology classroom. That's not possible, she whispered, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. That can't be. The filaments continued to grow even as she watched, thickening slightly, weaving together into something that resembled, with each passing second, less a chaotic biological accident and more a deliberate, structured pattern, a lattice, almost, knitting itself together directly over the wound with a slow, patient precision that made the hair on Sakura's arms stand fully on end. This is chakra, some distant, analytical part of her mind supplied, cutting through the fog of shock and fear. This has to be chakra. Some kind of technique. But whose? He's unconscious. He can't be doing this on purpose. The wood, because that was what it was, unmistakably, undeniably, pale and fibrous and growing directly from Naruto's own skin in a manner that defied every single principle of biology, or ninjutsu Sakura had ever studied, continued its slow, patient spread, sealing the worst of the wound beneath a thin, hardening lattice that, even as her mind screamed in protest at the sheer impossibility of what she was witnessing, seemed to be doing exactly what her own desperate hands had been trying and failing to accomplish for the better part of an hour. It was stopping the bleeding. Sakura sat back on her heels, staring, her hands still hovering uncertainly a few inches above Naruto's side, unwilling to touch the strange, wood-like growth now covering the worst of his wound, unable to look away from it either. "What are you?" she whispered, not to Naruto, exactly, though the question was aimed at him in the broadest sense, but to whatever strange, impossible thing had just manifested from somewhere deep within her unconscious teammate's body. "What did that monster do to you?" she thought, with a fresh spike of cold dread, of the golden-eyed figure's words, the thick, roiling chakra just beneath the surface, straining against its cage, the casual, delighted mention of a fox, of a seal, of something ancient and dangerous supposedly contained within the boy currently lying in front of her with wood growing out of his side like some grotesque, impossible garden. Is this that? She wondered, fear coiling tighter in her chest. Is this whatever sealed inside him, breaking free somehow? But even as the thought formed, some instinct told her it wasn't quite right. Whatever that figure had implied about Naruto, about some ancient, dangerous presence sealed away inside him, this didn't feel like that, exactly. There was nothing violent or malevolent in the slow, patient way the wood had grown, nothing that read, to her admittedly limited understanding of chakra sensation, as anger or hunger or any of the qualities she might have expected from something monstrous clawing its way free. If anything, the sensation that had traveled up through her palms while she'd watched it grow had felt almost gentle, steady, warm, protective, in a way that reminded her, oddly, of nothing so much as sunlight falling across fertile soil. She didn't have time to examine the thought further. A sound from the tree line, faint, but unmistakably real this time, not the product of her own frayed nerves, snapped her attention away from the strange growth at Naruto's side and toward the surrounding forest with sudden, sharp alarm. Footsteps. More than one set? Approaching. Sakura's whole body went rigid, every instinct screaming at her to move, to hide, to do something, anything, to protect her two helpless teammates from whatever was closing in on their position. But there was nowhere to hide, not really, not in the middle of an open clearing with two unconscious boys who couldn't be moved without risking exactly the kind of injury she'd spent the last however many minutes desperately trying to prevent. She snatched up the kunai she'd set aside earlier, positioning herself between her teammates and the direction the footsteps seemed to be approaching from, her heart hammering so hard against her ribs she could hear it in her own ears, drowning out almost everything else. Please, she thought again, that same desperate, wordless plea from before. Please, not now. I can't. The footsteps grew closer, and through the dense undergrowth at the clearing's edge, Sakura caught glimpses of movement. 3 figures, moving with the deliberate, predatory caution of shinobi who had clearly heard the earlier commotion and come to investigate, drawn by the sounds of a fight and the promise of an easy kill on whatever was left behind. Well, said the lead figure, stepping into the clearing with an expression of open, delighted surprise at the scene laid out before them. 2 fallen genin, clearly incapacitated, and a third standing over them with a kunai clutched in a visibly shaking hand. Looks like somebody already did the hard work for us. Sakura recognized the headband immediately. Amigakure, Hidden Rain, the same village the disguised girl had claimed had ambushed her supposed team. 3 genin, all wearing the same distinctive rebreather masks that covered the lower half of their faces, eyes cold and calculating as they took in the scene. 2 down already, the second figure observed, circling slightly to get a better view of Naruto and Sasuke's prone forms. This is almost too easy. Stay back, Sakura said, her voice cracking despite every effort to steady it, kunai raised in a stance that felt, even to her, hopelessly inadequate against 3 opponents while she remained tethered to the spot, unable to retreat without abandoning her teammates entirely. Or what? The third figure said, an edge of genuine amusement in the muffled voice behind the rebreather. You'll fight all three of us at once? By yourself? With your friends already down? A low, unpleasant chuckle. We'll make this quick, at least. Hand over whatever scrolls you're carrying, and maybe we'll even let you walk away. Sakura's mind raced, cataloging options and finding all of them equally bad. She could not win a fight against 3 opponents, while also protecting 2 incapacitated teammates. She could not retreat without abandoning Naruto and Sasuke to whatever these strangers intended. She had, as far as she could see, no good options at all, only degrees of terrible. I'm not giving you anything, she said anyway, because surrender had never once, in her entire life, felt like an option worth taking seriously, however hopeless the alternative might be. You'll have to go through me. The lead aimed Genin's eyes crinkled above his rebreather in an expression that might have been genuine respect, or might simply have been anticipation of an easy fight made marginally more interesting by token resistance. Brave, he said. Foolish, but brave. Fine. Have it your way. He moved first, closing the distance with a burst of speed that Sakura, exhausted and terrified as she was, had no realistic hope of matching, and she braced herself, kunai raised, for an attack she fully expected to be the last thing she managed to defend against before this entire desperate situation collapsed into something far worse. The attack never landed. It happened in the space of a single, impossible heartbeat. The lead aimed Genin's outstretched hand, reaching for Sakura's kunai arm, suddenly caught fast in something that had not existed a moment before. A thick, gnarled coil of pale wood erupting up out of the churned earth of the clearing with a speed and violence that had nothing in common with the slow, patient growth Sakura had witnessed sealing Naruto's wound only minutes before. The aimed Genin's shout of surprise and pain cut through the clearing as the wooden coil tightened around his wrist, wrenching him backward off his feet, and behind him, his 2 teammates froze in open, disbelieving shock as more wood erupted from the ground in a sudden, violent cascade, thick roots and branches surging upward around Naruto and Sasuke's fallen forms in a spiraling, protective lattice, growing with a speed that defied every law of nature Sakura had ever understood, weaving together into something that looked, within the space of only a few seconds, disturbingly like the beginnings of a cage, or a cocoon. What? Sakura stumbled backward, staring in open horror and disbelief as the wood continued to grow, thick roots curling up and around her 2 teammates, forming walls, then arches, then something that resembled, with terrifying speed, a solid, enclosing dome of pale, living wood that sealed both unconscious boys away from view entirely. What is this? One of the aimed genin shouted, backing away from the rapidly expanding growth with visible alarm, the wooden coil around his teammate's wrist still tightening, dragging the struggling boy further from the clearing's center. Some kind of jutsu, the second genin said, though his voice had lost most of its earlier confidence, edged now with something close to genuine fear. Get back, get back! Sakura, for her part, could do nothing but stare, her kunai hanging forgotten at her side, as the wood continued its impossible, violent growth, branches thickening and twisting, roots tearing up through the soil in every direction, some instinctive, unknowable force directing every inch of the growth with what looked, disturbingly, like deliberate, protective purpose. It grew fastest and thickest directly around the space where Naruto and Sasuke lay, sealing them away behind walls of living wood that thickened by the second, while the surrounding growth spread outward in aggressive, thorn tendrils that lashed and coiled toward the 3 aimed genin with a speed and hostility that left absolutely no doubt as to its intent. It's protecting them, Sakura whispered, understanding dawning even through her shock. It's protecting them. The aimed genin, to their credit, did not stand around trying to understand what they were witnessing. The lead genin, still caught fast by the coil around his wrist, wrenched and twisted with increasing desperation as more wood surged up around him, thorn branches lashing toward his exposed legs with an aggression that made Sakura's stomach twist with a strange, vertiginous mixture of terror, and something that might, impossibly, have been relief. Cut it! Cut it now! The trapped genin shouted, and his teammate lunged forward with a kunai, slashing at the wooden coil around his wrist with quick, panic strikes. The wood split and splintered under the blade's sap, if that was even the right word for whatever pale, faintly luminous fluid wept from the cuts, leaking out in slow rivulets, and after several frantic strikes, the coil finally gave way enough for the trapped genin to wrench his arm free, stumbling backward with a fresh cut along his wrist where the wood's rough bark had torn his skin. "What is this place?" the third genin said, backing away rapidly as more wood surged up around the clearing's perimeter, thick roots tearing through the soil in every direction with a groaning, splintering sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. "This isn't natural. Nothing in this forest grows like this." "I don't care what it is," the lead genin snarled, clutching his bleeding wrist, eyes wide with a fear that had nothing to do with any ordinary shinobi opponent. "We're leaving. Now." They fled, all three of them, crashing back through the undergrowth in a route that bore no resemblance whatsoever to the confident, predatory approach they'd made only minutes before, and within seconds the sound of their retreat had faded entirely, swallowed up by the dense, ancient trees of the forest, leaving Sakura alone in a clearing that had, in the span of less than a minute, transformed itself into something utterly unrecognizable. The wood continued to grow for a short while longer even after the genin's retreat, though more slowly now, the frantic, violent speed of its earlier expansion settling into something calmer, more deliberate, thickening the walls of the dome that had sealed Naruto and Sasuke away, smoothing rough edges, weaving loose branches together into a tighter, more cohesive structure that looked less, with every passing second, like an accident of violent chakra and more like something that had been built, however impossibly, with genuine intent and care. Sakura stood frozen at the edge of the clearing for a long moment, kunai still clutched forgotten in one hand, staring at the strange, dome-shaped structure of pale, living wood that had swallowed both her teammates from view, her mind struggling to process the sheer, overwhelming scale of what she had just witnessed. "Naruto?" she called, finally finding her voice, though it came out thin and shaking. "Naruto, can you hear me?" "Sasuke?" No answer came from within the wooden dome, though that, she reasoned, forcing herself towards some kind of rational calm despite everything, was hardly surprising, given that both boys had been unconscious before any of this had even begun. She approached slowly, cautiously, half expecting the wood to react to her the way it had reacted to the genin, lashing out, defensive, hostile to anyone who came too close. But as she drew nearer, reaching out with visibly trembling fingers to touch the rough, pale bark of the structure, nothing happened. The wood simply sat there, solid and unmoving, warm beneath her palm in a way that felt, disturbingly, almost like touching living skin rather than plant matter. "Please let me in," she murmured, not entirely sure who or what she was addressing, the wood itself, some instinctive protective force behind it, or simply the exhausted, desperate hope that had carried her through the last hour. "Please. I need to see them. I need to know they're okay." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, almost gently, a section of the wooden wall directly in front of her began to shift, branches unweaving, roots withdrawing back into the earth with the same slow, deliberate patience she'd witnessed in the wood's first, earlier growth around Naruto's wound, until a narrow opening had formed, just wide enough for her to duck through. Sakura didn't hesitate. She ducked inside immediately, kunai forgotten entirely now, her whole attention consumed by the need to see her teammates, to confirm with her own eyes that whatever strange, impossible thing had just happened, they were still, somehow, alive. The interior of the wooden dome was warmer than the surrounding forest, and dimmer, lit only by thin shafts of filtered light that made it through gaps in the woven branches overhead. Naruto and Sasuke lay exactly where she had left them, and for one heart-stopping moment Sakura feared the worst, that despite everything, despite the strange, protective wood that had grown up around them, she had somehow lost them both in the confusion. Then Naruto's chest rose, a shallow but visible breath, and beside him, Sasuke shifted slightly, a low, pained murmur escaping him, and Sakura's knees very nearly gave out beneath her from sheer, overwhelming relief. "Oh, thank goodness," she breathed, dropping to her knees beside them both, checking pulses with hands that shook badly, relief and residual terror warring for dominance in her chest. Thank goodness, thank goodness." Naruto's wound, she saw, examining it properly now in the dim, filtered light, had been almost entirely sealed beneath the strange, wood-like lattice she'd first witnessed forming, not healed, exactly, not in any sense she recognized from her medical studies, but stabilized in a way that had clearly stopped the bleeding entirely, the pale, fibrous growth knitting itself directly into the torn edges of skin and muscle in a manner that should, by every principle of biology she understood, have been agonizing, and yet Naruto's expression, beneath the wood, remained slack and peaceful, showing no sign of the pain such an intrusion ought to have caused. "What are you?" she whispered again, staring down at the strange, sleeping boy in front of her, half in wonder now rather than pure fear. "What is this? What did that monster in the forest actually do to you?" She had no answer, not yet, and no way of finding one, not stuck here, in the middle of the forest of death, with a wounded and unconscious teammate whose body had apparently just grown its own defensive fortress from raw wood and chakra, and another teammate marked with something dark and unnatural that pulsed, faintly, every few minutes, in a rhythm that made her deeply uneasy every time she caught sight of it. But she was alive. They were both alive. And for the moment, huddled inside the strange, impossible safety of a wooden dome that had grown itself directly out of her teammate's own body, that had to be enough. She checked Sasuke next, carefully, examining the dark mark at his neck with a wary, uncertain hand, unwilling to touch it directly after everything she'd already witnessed today. It had spread slightly since she'd last looked, thin, branching lines of unnatural darkness radiating outward from the original bite mark, tracing intricate, almost decorative patterns across the pale skin of his neck and shoulder. It pulsed faintly as she watched, a slow, rhythmic glow that reminded her, uncomfortably, of a heartbeat, and Sasuke's breathing hitched slightly in response, a low, pained sound escaping him that made her chest ache with helpless worry. "I don't know how to help you," she admitted quietly, brushing a strand of dark hair away from his sweat-damp forehead with a gentleness that surprised even her, given how tightly wound with fear she still felt. "I don't know what that thing did to either of you. But I'm not leaving. I promise. Whatever happens, I'm staying right here until you both wake up." Sasuke didn't respond, couldn't, unconscious as he was, but something in his expression seemed, fractionally, to ease at the sound of her voice, and Sakura chose to take what small comfort she could from that, however illusory it might have been. She settled herself between her two teammates, kunai held ready despite the strange, reassuring solidity of the wooden walls surrounding them, and began, methodically, to assess what resources she had left, how much of her medical supplies remained, how much water, how much of anything that might help her keep both boys stable until they woke, or until help arrived, or until she figured out some plan that didn't rely entirely on hope and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. It was not a long list. But it was what she had, and she set to work with the same fierce, methodical determination that had carried her through every study session, every extra hour spent poring over field manuals that her teammates had teased her, gently, for caring about so much. "This is why I studied," she thought, redressing the edges of Naruto's wound where the strange wood hadn't quite sealed it, careful not to disturb the pale, fibrous growth itself. "This is exactly why." Time passed strangely inside the wooden dome, the filtered light shifting slowly overhead, marking the passage of what Sakura guessed was another hour, then two, though without a clear view of the sky she couldn't be entirely certain. She kept careful watch over both boys, checking pulses, checking breathing, occasionally daring to peer back out through the narrow opening the wood had formed for her, checking the surrounding clearing for any further sign of danger. It was during one such check, perhaps 3 hours after the wood's initial, violent growth, that she noticed something new. The bark-like texture that had appeared around the edges of Naruto's wound seemed, subtly, to be receding, not vanishing entirely, but softening, the pale, wood-like ridges gradually giving way to something that looked more like ordinary, if strangely textured, skin. The transformation was slow, almost imperceptible if she hadn't been watching so closely, but unmistakable once she noticed it. "Is it healing?" she wondered aloud, running a careful finger along the edge of the wound, half expecting the rough, fibrous texture to remain unyielding, and finding instead something that gave, slightly, beneath the pressure, in a manner far closer to living tissue than to actual wood. "Is that even the right word for what's happening to you?" Naruto stirred faintly at the touch, the first real sign of returning consciousness she'd seen from him since the attack, and Sakura's whole body went taut with a fresh surge of desperate hope. "Naruto?" she said, leaning closer, careful not to jostle his side. "Naruto, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, once, twice, and then, slowly, painfully, opened. For a long moment, Naruto simply stared upward, his gaze unfocused, clouded with the particular disorientation of someone surfacing from somewhere very deep and very far away. Sakura watched, hardly daring to breathe, as his eyes gradually sharpened, awareness returning in slow, visible increments. Sakura? His voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper, cracked with disuse and residual pain. I'm here, she said, and found, to her own faint embarrassment, that her voice had gone thick with tears she hadn't fully realized were building. I'm right here. You're okay. You're going to be okay. Naruto's brow furrowed, some confused, half-formed question visible in his expression even before he managed to voice it. What happened? Where? His gaze drifted, slowly, taking in the strange, dim, wood-walled space around them, the pale branches arching overhead in a structure that bore no resemblance to any part of the forest of death he'd walked through before losing consciousness. Where are we? I don't know how to explain it, Sakura admitted, helping him shift slightly, careful of the still healing wound at his side, but I think you did this, Naruto. Somehow. I don't understand it myself, but this whole, she gestured helplessly at the wooden wall surrounding them, this whole thing grew out of you. Out of your wound. It protected us. It scared off an entire team that came looking for an easy kill. Naruto stared at her, uncomprehending, his gaze drifting down toward his own side where the strange, pale, fibrous growth still clung to the edges of his healing wound. I did what? I don't know, Sakura said again, helplessly. I don't have any explanation for it. But you're alive. Both of you are alive, and I don't think that would have been true without whatever this is. Naruto's gaze shifted, slowly, towards Sasuke's still form beside him, and his expression tightened with fresh alarm at the sight of the dark, spreading mark still visible at his teammate's throat. What happened to him? What did that guy do to Sasuke? I don't know that either, Sakura admitted, her voice cracking slightly. He bit him. Some kind of curse mark, maybe. I don't know what else to call it. It's been spreading slowly since then, but Sasuke's breathing has stayed steady. I've been watching him as closely as I can. Naruto's hands curled into fists at his sides, weak but unmistakably furious, his exhausted, pain-clouded eyes sharpening with something fierce and protective despite everything his battered body had just endured. Where is he? The guy who did this? Gone, Sakura said. He left right after he hurt you. I don't know where. I don't know why he left at all, honestly, given how easily he could have finished us. Naruto was quiet for a long moment, processing this, his gaze fixed on the strange, pale walls surrounding them, on the fibrous, wood-like texture still visible at the edges of his own wound. I don't understand what's happening to me, he said finally, quietly, and there was something small and frightened in his voice that made Sakura's chest ache with sympathy. Sakura, what if? He stopped, swallowed hard, forced himself to continue. What if this is because of the fox? What if whatever sealed inside me is doing this, and it's not? What if it's not something good? I don't think it's that, Sakura said, though she had no real evidence to back up the reassurance beyond her own instinct, the strange, warm, protective quality she'd felt radiating from the wood as it grew. Whatever this is, Naruto, it protected us. It protected you and Sasuke both, and it drove off 3 enemy shinobi without hurting either of you at all. If it were something malicious, I don't think it would have done that. Naruto didn't look entirely convinced, his expression still shadowed with the particular, familiar fear that had haunted him for as long as Sakura had known him, the fear of being something other, something monstrous, something the village's whispered rumors and sideways glances had always seemed to confirm long before he understood why. But he didn't argue further, exhaustion and pain clearly outweighing whatever anxious thoughts continued to churn beneath the surface, and after a moment his eyes drifted, heavily, back towards Sasuke. We need to help him, he said. Whatever that mark is doing to him, we can't just leave him like this. I know, Sakura said. But I don't know how to help him, Naruto. I don't have the training for whatever this is. All I can do is keep watching, keep him stable, and hope we reach the tower soon enough to get him real medical help. Naruto nodded slowly, his eyelids already growing heavy again despite his evident effort to stay alert. The exhaustion of massive blood loss and whatever strange transformation his body had just undergone clearly proving too much to hold off any longer. Rest, Sakura told him gently, easing him back down. You need to rest. I'll keep watch. I promise, Naruto, I'm not going anywhere. He murmured something too quiet to make out, already drifting back under, and Sakura settled in beside her two teammates once more, alone with her thoughts, alone with the strange, impossible wooden sanctuary that had grown itself into being around them, and alone with the quiet, growing certainty that whatever had happened to Naruto today, whatever strange new piece of him had just revealed itself in the depths of the forest of death, nothing about Team 7's situation, or Naruto's future, was ever going to look quite the same again.